Good morning, everybody. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Benoit Molson, and as has been told, have you started recording?
Yes.
I'm the chair of the Department of Psychiatry. I'm grateful for those of you who are attending today. And I would ask for those of you who are not talking to mute yourself. And by the way, John, you may be able to see who is talking because they light up when they talk, and you are welcome to jump in and say, John Smith, please mute yourself if they are not muted. So anyway, as you have heard, unfortunately, Rachel cannot, my faithful administrative coordinator, cannot attend today, but I should be able to cover what she was going to cover. So the outline of the presentation is, why would anybody want to be promoted? And you have on the right on this slide, the idealistic view of promotion, which is ascending to heaven. And you're on the left, the miserable, working in the mine, being covered of mud and trying to get up a rickety scale. You decide which one describes you better. I hope it's the right and not the left. We'll discuss briefly the junior versus the senior promotion and how they are different from the University of Toronto perspective. I will touch on the platform, but as you heard from John, there will be lecture later this afternoon to discuss on the two most likely platform for most people, which are research and CPA. I would say in the department, there is about 60% of people who go on CPA, maybe 50 to 60, 30 to 40 who go on research, and maybe 10 or less who go on education scholarship. And on occasion, I'm talking for senior promotion, people who go on teaching. I've been associated with the executive committee of the department for now 13 years. I can remember only 3 people. We have a third this year. So not even one every 3 or 4 years would go some promotion teaching. We won't discuss it much today. It's a special pathway that we can discuss if you're interested. Then the timeline, and then unless I talk too much, which I'm prone to, some time for a few questions. Maybe you can put your question as suggested by John in the chat, and John will be able to facilitate the question by reading them and organizing them when I'm finished with my presentation. So the first question, why going for promotion? So for those of you who know the US Constitution, it's start by something that we take it for granted that human beings are entitled to the pursuit of life and freedom and happiness. Okay, so at the university we take it for granted that promotion is important, and we don't need to argue why it's important. It should be self-evident. So that, and the governing council explain that the awarding of a rank confers you a status which is acknowledged and respected both inside and outside the academic community. And some people will disagree and believe we are 200 plus year study for the institution. It doesn't matter. And if you feel that way, by the way, nobody is forced to apply for promotion, but somebody like me would encourage anybody who meet criteria to apply. And I will discuss why you should not apply too early, but you should not apply too late either. And the governing council echo what I was saying, that they don't explain why it's important. They say it's evident why it's important. And I can tell you that if you called your grandma or your 90, my mother is 92-year-old, and I say I'm a professor, she instinctively understands that it's more important to be a professor than to be an assistant professor. And it's more important to be an assistant professor than being a lecturer. And it's not because we don't value people. We value everybody, but we acknowledge promotion, which is, and it's not promotion for the sake of promotion. It's a recognition that what you have done is worth something. and all the work and all the effort where you don't get rewarded on a day-to-day. The university doesn't pay you. The university acknowledge that what you did is meaningful and important by granting you promotion. And then the other side, if it's important and it has to remain important, it's not a seniority process. We're not a unionized shop and you automatically get promoted after 10 years or 5 years just for presence. You need to have accomplished something, and the promotion is a recognition. So, and they explain that if we gave promotion to everybody, then it would become meaningful for everybody. So I'm not going to discuss this a lot. I think you made the decision to join an academic department. All of you could have gotten a job in industry or in community-based practice or in a non-academic institution. So you must believe that it's important, and you're attending the meeting today. I won't go now. The process of junior promotions, senior promotion are very important. Most of what I'm going to talk about is senior promotion, but I will cover briefly junior. And for those of you going to junior promotion, my hope is in 4 to 10 years, you will go to senior promotion. So hearing about today, I always said to junior people I mentor that an academic career is a marathon, it's not a sprint. If you get promoted to full professor at 45, that the last promotion of your life, you will spend the next 30 years being a full professor. So you don't need to be, it's not a sprint, okay? But there are some typical milestone, and it's typical, for instance, for people who are going to be for junior promotion to have been a lecturer for something between 2 to 10 years. Some people with 20 years, they don't need to. And then when you're an assistant professor, it's typical to be promoted to associate, I would say 7 years plus or minus, anywhere from 5 to 10. Some people try to go faster. There are no rules that you have to wait, but you're going to be scrutinized if you try to become an associate professor after only 3 or 4 years. And there are people who wait longer and wait 15, 20 years, and there's nothing wrong. You can pace yourself if you prefer, but the norm would be a 7 year, let's say, think of plus or minus 2 to 3 years. And then when you're an associate professor, the same apply. Probably between 5 and 10 years later, you should become a full professor if you continue to do the same kind of work. Some people decide to stop. Some people stop as assistant. I'm famous for, some people don't like my style, but it's my style, for saying nobody should die a lecturer. But there is nothing wrong to become an assistant professor and say, that's all I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to be a professor. I'm now in the professorial group and I'm done with academic promotion. Nothing wrong to be promoted to associate. And not all assistant can become associate, and not all associate can become professor. It is a pyramidal system, but regardless of what's your goal today, again, I congratulate you for having that goal. To my view, it's worthwhile. So let's talk about junior promotion. It's from lecturer to assistant, and it's a fairly simple process that's organized and adjudicated by the department. So we have a promotion committee in the department that's actually the same as the appointment committee. Because if you're a PhD, and I know some of you are PhDs today, you are not really promoted. If you're a lecturer PhD, you apply status, what's called status only at the university. It's not truly a promotion. You're applying for an appointment as assistant professor, and when you get it, your appointment as a lecturer finish. If you're an MD, it is a promotion, but it's the same committee. And it's the appointment committee, which is shared by me and consists of the 5 vice chair. So for those of you who don't know the department, I think Mary Jane is attending today and we'll talk later. She's our vice chair for mentorship and equity. We have a vice chair for basic and clinical science, which by and large is Krista Langto, who is a Mary Jane and Krista PhD, and Mary Jane had the job before Krista, and their Krista role is to support the non-MD, the PhD. We also, when I say the non-MD, it's because it's not just PhD. We have some people who have master, we have people who have JD, we have people who have other degree, but by and large, it's a group, 90+% are PhDs. So I will refer to them as a PhD in our department. So we have a vice chair research, Alistair Flynn, then we have a vice chair clinical and innovation, who is Vicky Sturgeopoulos, and then we have the vice chair education, Sanjeev Sokalingam. So the 5 vice chair and I are the appointment committee, and we will adjudicate your application if you apply to become from a lecturer to an assistant. It's a fairly simple application. It should not take you 50 hours. It should take you 3 hours. But we see some people who have taken 20 minutes and send us a 3-line cover letter with their CV, and it's not right either. So it's not 40 hours, but it's not 20 minutes. It should take you 3 to 4 hours if you have an updated CV to compose a 2-page cover letter explaining why you are planning for promotion and why you deserve it. And the definition there is simple, is to have been involved in the sustained mission of the department. And you could have been a researcher, you could have supervised resident in the ED when you're on call. So as long as you have been involved and you have done it for sustain, if you have done research and you have published paper, or if you are involved in curriculum development and you do a lot of work, 2 to 3 years may be enough. If you are somebody who is more marginally involved, once a month you have an ED shift and you supervise 1 resident during your ED shift, you may need to have a list of 20 residents and explain what you have done and show that they think that they learn from you. And therefore, if you do it once a month and it's the same resident for a year, it may take you 10 years. But anybody who does anything academic should be eligible and at some point to go from lecturer to assistant. And if you are a lecturer for 25 years in the department, maybe, again, I'm not trying to be mean with anybody, but maybe then why are you in the department? If you have 0 involvement, if you never supervise anybody, if you never, and if you say, well, I'm in an hospital, they don't have a resident, then volunteer to do medical student OSCE twice a year, do that for 7, 8 years, you have done 15 OSCE, apply for promotion and we'll give you promotion. We do recommend your promotion to obviously the Faculty of Medicine. We don't really make the decision, but it would be very rare that they don't follow recommendation. And if we believe, it's not that people who apply sometimes don't deserve to be promoted, is if they have not done the work to update their CV, to write a 3-page to explain what they have done, then we'll tell them you're not ready for promotion, and we'll negotiate with them and we'll tell them what to do. And there are, for instance, somebody who was, their only academic role was to organize a CME lecture in the community in Mississauga for a group of psychiatrists in community-based practice. They would meet once a month and they would discuss an article. And he had done it for, I don't know, 15 years. And he said, I should be promoted. And we agree, but we say, you know, it's an education thing. You need to have an assessment. You need to have a survey from the people who attend, who need to tell us that they value and that they learn something. So he went back, he did this, he resubmitted his dossier, we promoted him. So the bar, I'm not saying the bar is low, but I'm saying the definition is sustained involvement. So I'm going to stop to talk to junior promotion, except there may be a slide later with the deadline and whatever, and I'm going to talk mostly about senior promotion. So there are 2 steps, assistant to associate, associate to professor, and it's organized by the department, and we've put a lot of work. It starts, thank you, John, for organizing it with this primer, but there's a lot of work that will take place, including and then it's while the lecturer starts in December now when people will be promoted by next June, the assistant, the senior promotion is a longer process. And for those of you who have done a lot of work, have updated your CV, my estimate is it may still take you 20 to 50 hours. Some people are faster to write a good dossier and update it. So I said to people who write paper, it's like writing a 3 systematic review. So it is some work, and the bar is clearly higher. And as I said, it's not like junior promotion. It is not expected that every faculty member will become an associate professor, and it's not expected that every associate will become a professor. After all the work that I will describe done by you and the department, we will make a recommendation to the decanal promotion committee. Decanal mean the promotion committee of the dean. That committee is chaired by Mary Jane Esplin, so you're lucky to have her as one of your speakers later, because she now has done this, I don't know, I don't not kept track, but if she has done that for 5 years, she has seen 1,500 dossiers. So through pattern recognition, it's like a good radiologist. She can tell you in 5 minutes if you're ready, you're not ready, or maybe you're on the fringe, and maybe you need, if you did this and emphasize that. So she's willing to help people, and that's why she's talking to you today. So next slide. What are the platform? And as I said, it's the same platform for junior and senior, but the junior is less formal. So it can be, you can say, I've been involved in teaching, and I'm also doing a QI project evaluation, and I've published a review as third author. So you don't necessarily need to identify a platform. Many people, for them, the platform can be teaching. But for senior promotion, you need to prove excellence in one of the 3 platforms of scholarly activities: education, research, or CPA accredited professional activity. And as I said, even though a lot of people start by saying, I'm a researcher, I want to apply in research, they end up with your help to reformat their dossier as CPA, and that's the majority of people. And I will talk a little bit more, and you're going to have more lecture to understand the difference. Some of you straddle both. Most people straddle both. I think I'm a researcher, but I also do some CPA. So, and many people do both. And since you need excellence only in one platform, it is better to pick one platform and to basically put all your egg in this basket. To give you an example, if I was a researcher, but I do some CPA for knowledge translation and dissemination, it is better for me to present that under the label knowledge dissemination or translation and dissemination in my research dossier, and to get more credit in my research dossier. And then I have a CPA dossier where I say all my CPA is done to the service of my research. Conversely, if you're going to decide to apply in CPA, but you're also somebody who published paper, as grant, and so on, it's better for you to say, my research is really linked with my CPA, and to talk about your research in your CPA dossier, and to have a title, research dossier, and 2 sentences, all my research is in my service. For some people, sometimes people, they are researcher on whatever, in my world, the late life depression and the biology of late life depression. But for whatever reason, they have also an interest in organizing a clinic or a service to improve access to service for, let's say, outpatient ECT. And they have organized a service, and they want to, and it's not linked to their research. And so they would present that in a CPA dossier, and people will say they are competent in CPA, but it's really, they get no point. So the general advice, there are of course a few exceptions, to pick one platform and to try to link everything thematically to your platform. Education would be reserved for people who are educator and who develop curriculum. For instance, I'm going to take an example. Somebody like Mark Pfeffer grad, or who would have had applied and got promoted, based on all the work he did for the residency, or Rad Awa, I am pretty sure applied based on in education. He was for 10 years organizing the education and the curriculum for medical students in psychiatry. So unless you have one of the, if you're a director of something in education, somebody like John, if you have a role and a big title and you're involved half of your time in education, you may, I'm not saying we never promote anybody in education, but looking at the board, I think very few of you would apply in education. Most of you are going to go on research or CPA. Teaching is separated, not because it's not considered scholarly, it's because you need, for senior promotion, you need one of the three platforms plus some teaching. You cannot be promoted as U of T, even if you're a researcher with a 500 paper, New England paper, million of grant. If you, we are not a research institute, we're a university, you need to have been involved in teaching. And I can tell you, it's not a joke. This year, there is somebody who talked to me 2-3 years ago, wanted to become a professor. And I said, you had all the grant, all the paper you need, but you're not doing any teaching, you won't be promoted. So please, and I gave him some advice about what he needed to do. And he said, given the type of research I do, I don't see medical student, I don't see resident. I say, volunteer for us kids, do some STACER exam, build a teaching dossier. So volunteer at IMS to do some lecture. He did for 2 years. He went for promotion this year. The decanal promotion committee say, ready on the basis is clearly a researcher with and is ready for promotion on research, but give us more detail about the teaching, and we had to rework on the teaching dossier, resubmit it, and he was promoted. So you don't need necessarily to do, to give you an example, there's a PhD person who was a neurochemist who got promoted for professor, I don't know, 10 years ago. The only thing that person was doing is teaching. Every other year, he would take a fellow to work with him for 2 years. So over 15 years, he had 7 fellows, and he said, that's my teaching. And that was fine, that's enough. He was a very specialized person. He didn't want to give lecture, he didn't want to be involved with medical student resident. He was a PhD neurochemist, and he had fellow who were a postdoc fellow, PhD neurochemist who would come from all over the world, spend 2 years with him, and that's enough. So, but they need to be some teaching. And that's what I mean by competency teaching and excellence in one of those 3 activities. And then for the few people, as I said, there have been 3 cases over the past 13 years who say, I don't do research, I don't do education scholarship, I don't do CPA, but I'm an excellent teacher. Okay. So if you want promotion solely on sustained excellence as a teacher, the manuals say at least 10 years, typically it's 15 or 20 years. And while it is possible to be promoted to associate, and technically it's possible to be professor, I know of only 1 case of human memory in the Department of Psychiatry. So the past 30 plus years. So not saying it's impossible, I'm saying the bar is very high, and you need really to be a master teacher. You need to be somebody who has taught 100 of students and residents, as a 4.9 out of 5 teaching score, and who has gotten several prizes on teaching. And usually you will know it because not only you got prize in the department, but you were nominated to get prize in the university or nationally or internationally. So I'm not saying you cannot be promoted as a teacher to associate or full professor, but it's a slow road, and you need to be really special because we have 950 faculty member, and all of them do teaching. And if there is 1 every 3 years, so if you have to be literally not even the first percentile, but the 1 in 300 superlative teacher. It's easier if you are really, and then maybe if you believe you're a teacher, you're an educator, and then again, talk to your chief, talk to your division director, talk to me, and we will give you an honest opinion. And by the way, one thing for promotion, the university said anybody who is on faculty has the right to apply for promotion. So I saw somebody who has been who is a lecturer, and has been a lecturer for first year, was just finishing a fellowship. You know, you and I have talked several times. We have done some work together. If you decided to apply for professor, it's your right. You could put a dossier and say, I want to be promoted to professor. And you will go all the way to the decanal committee, and the decanal will make a recommendation to the dean, and the dean will decide, because all of us are advisory to the dean. So the university recognizes that sometimes people are oppressed or unappreciated in their department, and anybody has the right to go. In practice, it is my interest as the chair to promote as many people as I can. And we are all trying to support and encourage our faculty. If we tell you that we don't believe you are ready, usually you're not ready. And in my opinion, it's an error. Some people decide, I want to take my chance. And by the way, we give you, I'm not saying you will never be promoted. I'm saying it's a little bit too early. Wait for 2 years. In 2 years, you have a 98%. If you go this year, it's a 50-50. And people say, I want to take my chance. And 50-50, one time out of two, the decanal will, or the departmental committee will say, we are not supportive, and people get hurt. And again, I go back to where I started, is a marathon. So what difference does it make to you to become a full professor at 45 or 47? And then you're going to be a full professor for the next 20 or 25 years of your life. So if we advise you, if you're hospital chief, your division director, or the chair of the department, you'll truly tell you, wait. And we'll not just tell you, wait, we'll tell you, wait, and here is what you need to do. So for instance, the typical assistant to associate professor on a research platform would have 20 publications. Half of them are first author, and will have at least one big federal grant like CHR, NIMH, Brand Canada, or 3 or 4 smaller grants. If you come and see me with 17 publications, I would tell you, wait 1 more year, you publish 6 publications per year, like 23, and come back next year. Now you can tell me, but I have a publication of high quality in the New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA, and that should count, you know, and you can start trading and say it should count as 3 publications, and I've been highly cited. And maybe, by the way, there is no rule. The manual doesn't say 20. We are telling you that's the norm. You can decide you're a maverick and you can do it. Some people come with 40 publications. I tell them, why did you wait? Some people will come with 15 and I tell them to wait. But a reminder, you can do whatever you please. And the same way you can write whatever you will hear a lot of advice this afternoon about format, template. We are trying to make you successful. You have the right to put whatever you want in your promotion dossier. It's yours. And we will forward it to the decanal committee and the dean. I've seen some people who cut and paste some article in the Toronto Star and Xerox them. Some people may want to send a tape of them singing or playing the piano. You can do whatever you please. We'll tell you what most people do, and we'll tell you how they are successful. But if you want to do it differently, it's your right. Okay, a very important reminder, and I've already starting. Are you ready? We look only, the university look only at what you have done since your last promotion. So if you have published 20 papers as a lecturer or as a fellow, and then you become an assistant professor and you publish 4 more papers, and you tell me I have 24 papers, I will say, no, you have 4 papers. And you need to have a 20 plus, so wait. So you understand. And same thing, if you wait too long as an associate professor and you have 60 papers, and then you publish only 20 more papers and you say the typical professor in the department has 80 and have 80, I will say, no, you have 20. And typically it's 40, 45 plus, the norm would be 60. So I said, yes, if you had done 20 and then promoted plus 60, you have enough, but you're going to give given credit for what you did since you were promoted as an associate. And so I have seen that happening, which is unfortunate. Somebody deciding not to go for promotion in their 50s, they get promoted 55 as an associate with 60 or 70 paper and 3 or 4 grants. And then they kind of semi-retire in their 50s, and they approach me in their 60s, 5 years, 6 years later, and they say, look, I have 80 publications and 4 grants. it should be enough. I say, yes, it should be, but the decanal will look at what you have done within the 7 years, and you have only 2 papers and no grant, and that's not going to cut it. So a few keyword taken directly from, by the way, all of you, if you are promoted, it's like a grant application, or when you want to publish a journal, you go to website, you download the instruction, you have to save as a PDF the promotion manual. My advice for my mentees, cut and paste it in a Word file, use the keyword as title, bold them, underline them. Some of them are what I call phantom title. When you're done, you delete them, but some of them stay. So word like advancement of knowledge, it translates in a concept of impact, and particularly important for you who go for CPA. CPA is all about impact. You will hear about it later, I'm sure. In terms of researcher, publishing important paper that are cited in journal with high impact is by itself a proof of impact. The CPA people could say it's unfair. You are not asked to transform the world when you are a researcher. You're asked to create knowledge, and it's the job of the CPA people to transform the world. So when you apply in CPA, you have to show that you're transforming the world. As a researcher, what you have to show is that you are creating in knowledge, and other people's job is to transform the world. Original nature means innovation. And for instance, if you are a junior person working with a mentor, and 100% of your paper and grant is with your mentor, you have your 20 paper, and it's always Smith and Wesson, and you're Smith, and Wesson is the full professor. The decanal committee will ask me and you, is it truly the word of Smith, or is it the word of Wesson? Okay, is it your work? Do you own it, or are you simply the guy who is carrying water for Wesson? So you will need to now, if Wesson write a letter and say, this part we do together, this part is led by Smith, that's a way to address it. And when you have your meeting with me for senior promotion, that's the kind of thing we'll talk about. Extent of achievement, I've already mentioned volume and metrics. The metrics are not published because, as I said, if you told me I've published 5 papers in my life, one in Science, one in Nature, one in New England, one in Lancet, one in JAMA, and I want to become an associate professor, I say you are ready. If you tell me I've published 20 papers in Canadian Journal of Psychiatry, I will say, why are you publishing only in Canadian Journal of Psychiatry? Why aren't you trying biological psychiatry or American Journal or whatever? So you can, same thing, if you tell me, I know one of you today who got a 20 million US dollar grant, and if you tell me I only have 1 grant, I say it's enough. You're ready for associate. And that's a pretty extraordinary achievement. If you tell me I've gotten 5 $50,000 grant, I say, okay, it's 250, it's the equivalent of the NARSA, of a NARSAD or a CHR small grant, and maybe that's enough. So when I say 1 grant and 20 papers, you can trade the more important paper. Or if you say my paper has been cited 952 times, I would say it's pretty damn good. I have 1 paper on my 500 paper. I have 1 that has been cited more than 1,000 times, and I've been at it for 30 years. So people don't understand. Most paper will be cited 6 or 7 times. That's what the H-index, by the way, that some people don't like, is all about. So, again, if you pay attention to H-index and you want to go in research, the typical associate professor has a double digit. 15 is better than 12, 22 is better than 15. But if you tell me my H-index is 13, and I'd say, okay, check, check, check. If you want to be a professor, I like to have a 2 or 3 in front. But if you have an H-index of 18 and you say, I do that very special work about transgender, and we have a small journal and those papers don't get published, cited a lot, that's okay, as opposed to the guy who does treatment of depression in adult. So we know that you are reviewed by academic, and so there are volume and there are metrics, and people say, why are they not in the manual? Because it's a case by case, depending of who you are, what you do. And it's a job of people like me and Mary Jane to know this. And when you have your meeting with me, I will ask you those questions. What's your index? How many papers do you have? Which journal do you publish? Are you cited? How many papers have you had cited more than 50 times? And by the way, if you're an associate professor and you have one, I will say write a little paragraph. That's a measure of impact for a researcher. If you're in CPA and you have only 6 papers, that's why you're going to CPA and not in research, and you have 5 or 6 small grants, and I will ask you different things. I will say, okay, you have that website. How many hits do you get per month? How many times do people download stuff from your website? So we do use those modern metrics, but not for research, but for CPA. And that's why some people who approach me and say, I should go on research. I have the 22 paper. I say, you have 22 paper, but you don't know it. You're really more a CPA guy than I use guy as a generic, by the way, gal, guy, woman, whatever, male, other, non-binary. So you're a person, an individual, a human being. So and I said, you believe you're a researcher, but you are from U of T, more CPA person. And some people tell me, no, my self-identity is a researcher. And they say, fine, we go back to what I was saying in the previous slide. You're right. Then they go as a researcher, and then they get the feedback that they should resubmit as a CPA. Wide reputation, which is interpreted for associate professor, you need to demonstrate you have a national reputation, meaning are you invited to give ground round at UBC? Are you on the board of a journal like the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry? Do you play a role on the research committee of your national organization? And for Professor International, same metrics, but and by the way, sometimes people get stunned by that. I said, you have an international reputation. They said no. Then I look at them with their CV. I say, oh, but you did that platform presentation at SACME when they met in Toronto. SACME is a US organization, even though maybe 25%. SACME is a society of whatever, medical education is for teacher and educator. And some people, and I say SACME is a US organization. You don't even realize it. So when we say international, if you give a ground round in Houston or in Buffalo, it's considered an international presentation. So scholarly product, again, research is going to be publication, peer-reviewed journal, and grant. CPA is way wider, book chapter, report, government document. We have a faculty member testifying in front of the Senate today about CPA. That's a product. That's a scholarly product. Curriculum design document, a teaching video, a website, the type, testifying in front of the Senate is a national work. But for instance, we had somebody who was promoted to professor based on their CPA work about driving and older people. And based on his work, the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario changed the way they assess driving in people 80 years and above. And even though it's not even national, it's provincial, the decanal committee does understand that not everybody, that's a measure of impact. If you have a law that's passed based on your own work, even though it may be an Ontario law and it's not even national, that's a measure of impact that may be enough to become a professor. That means your work changed the life of other people. So when we say national and international, again, all those things are in context. The manual, sometimes you may say we wish it would be more strict, but we have so many faculty, and Mary Jane will talk about this, that if we're trying to capture all the cases, it wouldn't work. So I'm talking generically, the generic associate professor or professor does this, does that. But if you are somebody who does something special and different, we will still support you. Come and talk to us. We'll try to help you to frame your work so that it fits the norms. So timeline for junior promotion. How are we in time, John? 10 more minutes?
We started a little bit late, so you've got about like 5-10 minutes. So
okay, so the timeline. So junior promotion, you did the first thing, you have already thought about it, and that's why you're attending. The next step was to attend the promotion primer. I will, it's really a waste of time when half of the people who come to see me say they didn't go attend the promotion primer. And I spend 1 hour telling them one-on-one what I told you as a group. And then we cannot look at their CV and we cannot do the specific information. So that's why I've asked that this is being taped, and I will not meet with people who either attended in person or watched the tape, the recording. So promotion primer done. You need to meet with your site chief and your division director, and they need to say, yes, we believe you are ready. Now, if they believe you are not ready and you believe that's because they don't like you and you decide to go, which is your right, then talk to me. But in general, junior promotion, there is no meeting with the chair because there are too many people. But the chief and the division, you need to get their support and they will need to write a letter. Online declaration of intent, I believe. Rachel sent an email earlier this week. The website is open. All you need to go is 5 minutes, a minute. You go on the website, you look at the email, you follow the link, and you put your name. I suspect it's a survey monkey. You put your name and you say you want to go. So we know, do we have 15 or 30 people going? My advice, if you are not sure and you have not yet talked to your division director and you're wondering if you should go on next year, declare that you want to go, and that gives you more time to then decide. And if then in a month you don't do the next step, it's normal. We always have 30, 40 people who say they are considering. We have 30 people, let's say 30 people say they are considering, 20 move to the next step, 15 submit the dossier, which is perfectly fine. In January, you have to submit your online application. And then again, some of you will do the declaration of intent, talk to your site chief, will stop there and you will do it next year and it's perfectly fine. And then in the spring, as I told you, we adjudicate, we send the recommendation to the Faculty of Medicine. And in June, they finish and they tell us, yes, you're ready. And typically you're approved as of June 1st. So it's a 6 months journey. And that's some online humor. You would say, why are, it's not like in business, you're not getting an increase or a new job. You are being promoted on the basis of the job you're doing. For the senior promotion, it's a more complicated and longer process. And as I said, those of you who are starting today, you're not going to be promoted July 1st, 2021. You will promoted July 1st, 2022. Okay. So same thing, reflection, you believe. And by the way, I advise at the excellent orientation organized by and created and organized by John, I said to people, attend the primer 2-3 years before the promotion to have an idea of where you're going. And then attend it a second time the year you do it, which is a different perspective. It's no longer the overall direction, is the intricacies of the promotion dossier. So those of you who attended 3 years ago heard me, and now you feel you are ready, you've already done the self-reflection. By the way, the Yogi Berra quote for this one is, if you don't know where you're going, you won't end up there. For those of you who prefer psychotherapy, it's what Yalom call a life script. Some at age 24, one day I thought maybe one day I want to be a chair in a Department of Psychiatry. And 30 years later, I did it. Okay. But when I did my interview for residency position, I talked about it as a career goal with the chair at that time. So it sounds bizarre, but Yalom says maybe if everybody who get a gold medal at the Olympic game thought about it 10 years ago. Most people who thought about getting a gold medal don't get one, and it's fine. I would have been happy to finish my life as a physician in chief, as a full professor. But so the self-reflection and self-assessment, we are a group that should be doing it better than others. Today, you are attending the promotion primer. Congratulations. Meet with your site chief and division director. We'll ask them for a letter of recommendation. And then send a letter to Rachel Delaney, who normally would have gone to timeline. It's easy. It's first name dot last name at utoronto.ca. And I think her name is somewhere in the program because she's supposed to present, but she's sick. She will schedule a meeting with me. And if you have done the primer, we'll review your CV and I will I will be the critical Frenchman to help you to improve your dossier. Most people find it painful but useful. And then better hear the criticism from your friend than being rejected by the decanal committee after 6 months of hard work. So in January or February, you will do the online declaration of intent. In April 2021, you will submit a first dossier, which is a draft. Doesn't need to be finished. The more polished it is, the better you will be able to use feedback. But for instance, if you decide that you are going to have a table with all your trainees and their name and where they are now, you can put table of trainees and it's blank in that dossier, and the reviewer, internal reviewer, understand that in the final product there is a table. So the April 2021, the more organized you are, the better it is, the better you will use the feedback. But you can submit a half-baked dossier. It's not the best, but if that's you are the type of people who do everything the day before the deadline, that the type of people you are, that doesn't mean you should not be promoted. In May, the departmental DPC, Department Promotion Committee, does a review and give you feedback and tell you how. They will tell you, green, your dossier is fantastic, you are ready, correct the typo, page 22. Red, we don't see enough on your CV and your dossier, you should wait a couple of more years and do this. And by the way, you should already have heard it from the chief and me, but sometimes we are wrong. We don't know, you give us a good story in writing. When it's put in talking, when it's put in writing, it's not good enough. But sometime we will tell you, look, it's a 50-50, and you say, I would like to do that first step and submit a dossier and get the feedback of the departmental, and they may tell you it's red. And then if it's red, my advice is withdraw and do what they tell you, wait a year or two. And I do not sit anymore on the departmental committee, so I don't influence them, and you get a true independent second opinion. And then based on that feedback, you finalize your dossier and you improve it as much as you can. And in July 31st, 2021, you submit the final dossier that cannot be changed. So for instance, if you have 20 publications and you say, oh, I have only 17, but you have 3 in press now, or 1 in press and 2 submitted, you probably will have above my threshold of 20 or 19, whatever, by July. In November 2021, the departmental committee meet and give the official review and take an official vote, as opposed to red, green, or yellow. By the way, there is a yellow. Many people at that first review get a yellow, where the committee say yes, but you need to, for instance, that's sometimes when people say, we saw a research dossier, we think it's going to fail as a research, but if you are willing to reformat it as a CPA dossier, we think you have a good chance, or vice versa. There is one guy who submitted as a CPA this year, and on my advice and Mary Jane advice, and all the departmental committees say, you know what, when we see the whole product, we think you would be better being research. And then he went back to, so he tried research, we told him do CPA, and the departmental did CPA. Now the final dossier was submitted as a CPA, as a research. And then that dossier is sent to external reviewer, and they write letter, and then it goes to decanal committee, and then the decanal do their review and their adjudication in the spring. And then in July, you get, and remember, by the way, the departmental committee is advisory to me. It would be extremely rare that the departmental committee say they are unanimously supporting you and I wouldn't give you my support unless I know something they don't know, like you have committed fraud or you abuse your student. But it will happen sometime that the committee of the department will be split. And usually Jim Kennedy and I, Jim Kennedy as a chair, will support you and will work more with you, and then we'll try to get you promoted. So there may be time for 2 or 3 questions, or not time. John, you tell me.
So I think we'll take questions at this point, Benoit. We're just actually responding to a few things in the chat. So there was a question just to clarify about the issue of in press publications by the end of July. So, so maybe you can
no. When you hear so many publications, it's in print. But again, people are not idiot, because if you have something that's in press in July, and they cannot, okay, let me go back to this one. Here is what happened really. They couldn't give you all the detail of, the cooking of the sausage. But so the department control everything until January. So you do your final submission in July. We send it to your external reviewer, who are people you have not published with and you're not working with. So they are really arm's length. You can make some recommendation, but Jim and I pick them. Then those people write letter. Then in July, during the summer, then the departmental committee review your dossier and your letter, and they make a recommendation to me. Then I take everything and I write about a 7-page letter summarizing everything with the help of Rachel. And Rachel now has done more than 100 with me. But Rachel spent 2-3 hours organizing everything, and I spent another hour or two sometime with Rachel finalizing things. And we send that with your letter of recommendation and your dossier to the decanal. The decanal meet, everybody who's in the Department of Psychiatry get out. So you get reviewed by cardiologist and anatomist or physiologist. And then what the decanal committees either approve you unanimously, or they take a vote, even if for there you will get a majority, and they approve you. They don't approve you. They recommend your promotion to the dean. And again, unless the dean knows something special, like you're facing some criminal investigation or whatever that they don't know, but he knows, I've never heard of the dean, and Mary Jane can talk about this, going against the recommendation of the committee when it's positive. If the committee at that point is not sure, they do what's called a deferral. And they will send me a letter saying, Dr. Smith has been, and I hope nobody's called Smith today. I know we have a Dr. Wesson today on the panel, but I don't think we have a Dr. Smith, but a Dr. Johns. So if you're Dr. Johns, the decanal committee say, we have differing Dr. Johns, and we would like more information on ABC. And then I contact you and I say, okay, the decanal, and I give you the example, they have no problem with your research, but they want more information about your teaching. Or they will say, we like everything, but we want to understand, I could that example, all the paper are Smith and Wesson, all the grant are Smith and Wesson. What is Smith doing? What is Wesson doing? And we want more clarification. So I tell that to you. You and I and Jim work together, and we do a 3-page response that we submit in writing to the decanal. And then I go to the decanal and I meet with them in person, and it's like an appeal. And I say, okay, here is the story. And then they take a vote, and then the final recommendation goes to dean, and the dean get either unanimous in favor or the committee was split. But if there is a majority, you get the decanal committee recommendation. But if there is, let's say, 17 people and 10 people voted that you should not be promoted and 7 voted that you should be promoted, you can, with my support, or without my support, appeal it to the dean. Because you're in psychiatry may defer to the vice dean, like Lynn Wilson. Lynn review everything and she make her decision, and she may decide the committee was split. I understand what they didn't like, but I know more than they do, and I promote you. If you have an unanimous committee, if 17 people voted against you, my advice is don't bother appealing. You probably, by the way, it happened once every 2-3 years, and that's probably that you heard from your site chief and your division director and me and the department committee that you should not go forward. So everybody told you don't go forward, and you say, I want to use my right to go forward. If then everybody agree with us, and even then I can tell you, I know one case of a professor, and everybody, I told her, so the site chief told her no, the division director told her no, I told her no, the departmental unanimous said no, the decanal committee said no, and the dean, reviewing everything, decided that there was some bias against this person and promoted this person. So which is fine. And I'm happy to have another professor in the Department of Psychiatry, but it's rare. It's probably once in 20 years. And I've had discussion with the dean and the vice dean, and they will usually consider an appeal when the decanal committee was split with a minority in favor of promotion. So in press, the reason I'm telling you all this, if you are in press in July, you are probably going to be in print by November. So by November, or not even November, March, 6 months later. So if you get deferred because the committee say we see only 15 paper, and they say they will tell us Dr. Jones is deferred because we want more detail about the productivity. If I can come in March and say at that point, 6 months later, and say, during the past 6 months, there was 5 more paper published and Dr. Jones got a grant from CHR, they won't ask you to go through the kind of the craziness of resubmitting the following year. They will say, fine, since we would promote you in 2023 on the basis of 22 publication and CHR grant. So my opinion is that you should have waited 1 year, and that's what I mean, the 99% certainty instead of taking the 50. But if the 50, if you have been able to get your grant and get your paper, in March, the decanal committee will recommend promotion by the deferral.
So I just want to see if there's any other questions at this time. I don't see any hands up or anything else in the chat. So is there anyone else who has a question for
You
Ben?
can unmute yourself if you have a question. There are 12 things in the chat.
So yeah, no, I've been answering this.
Oh, you have answered like the CV, yes, the web CV.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Benoit, for reviewing.
Good luck for the rest of the afternoon, and all of those of you at the end of the day will decide to go for senior promotion. Will talk to your chief. I don't want really to meet with you if your chief and your director thinks you should not go, unless you believe they are wrong, and the meeting with me is a first type of appeal. But in general, people who go forward get the support of their site, their hospital, or their research institute, and their division director. And you will meet with me during the next 4 months. And I'm looking forward. As I said, there are too many faculty members, 950 plus, for all of them to have one-on-one with a chair on a regular basis. If I wanted to meet every faculty member once a year for 1 hour, that would take more than half of my time. So, but I do enjoy meeting all of you when you go for senior promotion, and because I am proud of what our faculty members do. I'm always amazed when I meet with you and you tell me what you do, and I'm very pleased when you get promoted. So for me, it's a part of the job I enjoy tremendously. So I may have a terrible reputation. You may have heard that I'm a terrible, critical, mean person. When you meet with me, I hope I will change your mind. I will be critical and I will be frank. And if I tell you, please don't go this year and wait for next year, it's not to hurt you. It's because I want you to fly through. And as I say, it's a lot of work. There are a lot of people, I also say, please go this year. And they say, nah, this year I'm doing a trip this spring with my family to the Canadian Rockies, and I value the trip more than promotion, so I will do it next year, which is fine. With COVID-19, now you're stuck in your home. It's not a bad time to go for promotion. So I will see you in 3 months. Good luck. And by the way, there is a softer way. If you are not sure, you can also send me your CV and a brief message. And then we can decide if we should meet or not. So that again, my email is open, my office is open. As I said, I said at the orientation, I cannot meet with everybody, but I meet with every faculty. Yesterday, I met with an adjunct professor, assistant professor who wanted to meet with me. He had to wait maybe 3-4 weeks, but I met with him and he had a full hour of my time and we discussed about his career. and I'm willing to do that. But the senior promotion is a good time where it's a part of our process. So I enjoy the rest of the afternoon. I know that John and Mary Jane and Melanie Barwick have a very nice process. So, and see you soon, all of you.
Thank you, Benoit.
Bye.
So we're going to let Mary Jane get herself set up. We'll give the rest of you just a minute or two if you need to stretch, if you need to go get some refreshments or do whatever you need to do over the next couple of minutes while we get things set up for Mary Jane. And I see there's a question in the chat about H factor. I think Mary Jane can probably address the H factor question in her talk. So Mary Jane, are you going to be able to share your slides?
Yeah, I'm just going to do it now.
Okay.
Them. Are they okay?
Yeah, they're looking good. So maybe we'll just give another minute just to let people stretch, do what they need to do, and then you can officially start. Okay?
No problem. That's great.
I don't want people to get too much fatigue for this afternoon. So
Fatigue.
Please do what you do. Get out of your chair. Go do what you need to do if you need to. So grab a piece of chocolate. That always helps me. And so Mary Jane, also, just as for Benoit, I will monitor the chat. I'll either respond to something in the chat if I can, or I'll let you be aware of the question so you can have a chance to address it.
Great, that's perfect. Thank you. I'm not the best at doing that at the same time.
Okay, Mary Jane, maybe you can start your presentation then.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And welcome everybody. It's great to have so many individuals registered, because I think what John offers for faculty development, this is really key, a really good first step. In fact, you can come more than one time and learn new information. And the more you learn about what to be collecting now, in fact, it's a really good thing to do early in your career, because it's so much easier when you collect what you need for your dossiers going forward in a prospective manner. So thanks, John. And I think this is really an important day. And, you know, any of you can reach out to, I think, any of us that are presenting. I'm going to present on the research pillar. I did start out as a scientist. I've done a lot of CPA, but I went on research and CPA and teaching. But I'm going to focus on research. And this, in some ways, is the most straightforward. I think people find this platform a little bit easier to know what to be doing. This is the same slide, I think, that Benoit had, but it is really important in terms of really being clear who your identity is. I'm aware, and Benoit is aware. Many of us do more than one thing. And I know Benoit, perhaps not all chairs are the same, but I think Benoit feels very strongly, have your strength on one pillar and the teaching either competent and excellence, and try not to promote everything. And some of you will in fact meet the bar for excellence on all three, and it's possible to do that, but I know that he is biased towards trying to choose one and doing it really well. So your sense of who you are, because what you're really doing is you're telling us your story. So if your story is a scientist, or your story is leading some CPA activities, or you're an education scholar, everything that follows through will relate to that identity, and how you package what we're going to be looking at is all your scholarly work. So as Benoit said, you need to demonstrate the bar for excellence in one pillar and at least competence in the other. And some of you will be excellence in a pillar and you'll be excellence in teaching. That's fine. But you have to at least make the bar for competence in teaching. I'm going to talk about teaching because especially for the PhDs and the researchers and people doing CPA, we count all kinds of teaching. So I'm going to talk to you about evaluations, and if I don't, I forget to come back, make sure I do. This is a busy slide, but I actually borrowed it from Avram, who used to chair the decannal before me. And I like it. I know it's busy because it helps you really think about everything you're doing. So, and you'll hear more from Melanie as well about CPA. So most of us that started out in research, you have hypotheses or a plan or a vision for your research program. You know, you select your designs and your analysis and so forth. And, you know, by now you've written many grants and you've gotten them, or you wouldn't even be thinking of promotion. But really everything we do, whether it's education or teaching, it's very similar. And CPA, there's the plan, and we need to see your plan. What is the vision? Where did this all come from in the literature? And if it's clinical evaluation, well, why, you know, that's really important in our department, that if you're doing a lot of clinical, that we're evaluating and refining, and a lot of that's quality improvement. You'll hear Melanie talk about that. So we're interested in scholarly work. So think about this in relation to critical appraisal of the literature in the clinical situation, understanding the methods you've used in education or research, understanding how you're disseminating, making sure that you're sharing your results, whatever it is. And certainly in research, it tends to be peer-reviewed publications, but there are other mechanisms as well. So we need to understand right from the background, what is it all about, your identity, your scholarly activity. And then we're going to be evaluating critically your outcomes. So our review panel will be looking at the rigor involved. Was it critically appraised? Was there evaluation? So in research, it's a little bit more straightforward, because if you're starting to get published in especially high impact peer-reviewed journals, we know that other peer reviewers have looked at your work, or they wouldn't even publish. You've already gone through a lot of peer review. Same with grantmanship shows us that you've been writing grants, you've been getting grants, and we can see how much they are and who's reviewed it and the nature of the grant. And then dissemination, again, very important. It's not good enough to just get grants. You need to be publishing your results and disseminating. And that includes presentations, national and international presentations, local presentations. It all counts. So that's how to kind of think about it. And so if you're an earlier career person, think about that now. Start collecting and thinking about, what is your vision? Why are you doing this? And start collecting data to support your dossier. So all of the dossiers are different. A research dossier, a lot of this is on your CV, a little bit more consistent in style. You'll hear about the CPA dossiers. They are very variable because
Oh, Mary Jane, you froze. So, oh, you're back.
Am I back? Okay, sorry, thank you. It's okay to use your own style. The web, am I frozen? I hope not. The web CV is usually the one used. We'll accept others, but as John said in the chat, you know, you don't want to be making your reviewers irritable in any way. They need to be able to find things, and you'll hear about this in CPA and education dossiers. Research involves, you'll be asked about a research vision, your aims. We'll see that there are aims in each of your studies in the plan. It's really important to be prospectively collecting. And so I know Melanie will talk about this, and John, but even in research, if people have written you to borrow maybe a manual from a therapy study, or something else, a biology study, some method you've used. You know, keep all of that, because that starts to demonstrate the impact you're having in the field, and that others are watching your work and wanting to emulate or receive, you know, some opportunity to work together and whatever. And then there's a promotion dossier manual at the University of Toronto in the Faculty of Medicine. I would really advise you to take a look at it and look at the sections that pertain to your area of scholarship. Already, you should be keeping your CVs updated, track your impacts, and I know you're going to hear more about that later. Now, for research, scholarly products are a lot of things. The primary vehicle is peer-reviewed journals. It's not the only one, but it's a big one. So H-index, I'll talk about that in a second. So publications, we look at the journals, we look at the number. I'm going to come back to that when we look at associate professor versus full professor. Somebody asked about books or book chapters. We definitely look at them, but I know I was always advised as a junior, although I did it anyway. I mean, be careful about spending too much time on books or book chapters, unless maybe you're doing education scholarship or maybe CPA, because if you're doing a lot of that as a researcher, that may be taking time away from a peer-reviewed paper, and they are definitely weighted higher for research in particular. But you know, some researchers are doing, again, I'm just going to borrow from psychotherapy, it may be a technique they've developed. And so after they've done a randomized trial or two, they may want to publish a book, which is basically a manual of the technique or the therapy, which now has made it actually quite impactful in the field and available to others to emulate and reproduce research and use it in clinics. So definitely it counts. Everything counts. Guidelines. Some of you are researchers, but you may be involved in developing evidence-based guidelines for your field. Also very important, because that shows you're taking research scholarship that in fact you may have been very involved in, and you've been asked to be part of a national or an international group to develop clinical guidelines, which generally, as we know, there are mechanisms for that are based on levels of evidence. What we like to know there is if you've done government reports or guidelines, we really want to know what your role was on that. If you were on a team, fine, but we want to know, were you the Canadian? Were you the one that led a section of the guidelines? Were you invited because you're a researcher in relation to the guidelines? I did something like this for, I was in cancer genetics. So I developed the guidelines for psychosocial care when genetic testing was just happening in that field. And I was a researcher and I spent a lot of time on that, and it was a lot of meetings, but I felt it was so important to take evidence into the field. We were setting up the clinics in Canada. So, you know, just tell the story around that. Curriculum design documents also, those are considered scholarly products. I know John will talk about that. Many of you are involved in curriculum design, and you're in fact researching or evaluating that. So if you are the lead of that or part of a team, let us know what your role was in that, or which sections you led. It makes it a lot easier to review the level of scholarship. There are other types of products. Some of you may be doing teaching videos, websites. Melanie will focus on that because that's often part of CPA. All counts. It's not enough just like how many visit your websites. We want to know how people might be using the website. What are they taking off it? Like, where is the impact? And then we're going to look at the work. Is it at a national level? You heard Benoit talk about this, or an international level. So in terms of the scholarship or research, these are the primary rigorous metrics that we're zeroing in now. So publications, and that includes the journal impact. Now somebody asked about it. I don't have a number in my head. I know people look at 28, 25, 30. But I want to tell you, this is not mandated anymore. It's not really mandated. Everybody's putting the H-index in, but we're very aware. I've done quite a bit of work making sure that our committee at Decanol are aware of specialized journals. Some of the education scholarship journals are not high impact, like Nature or the American Journal of Psychiatry, or, you know, the New England Journal. So we can't all be in those journals. Like, I have them thinking about this within context of the specialty area, but so I don't want to say there's a cutoff. I will say this, John is also on my Decanol committee at UT. So I will say when the impacts is low, the H impacts is a low number. it is talked about usually. Usually a reviewer, a reviewer may describe this, well, the impact factor seems kind of low. Now, you have to think about this. First of all, I'm not in the room for psychiatry. There's conflict of interest, so I'm out of the room. I don't chair that part of the meeting. The other thing is you may be reviewed by somebody who publishes in Nature or somebody from surgery. You're not reviewed from psychiatry. So they don't always understand H impacts, maybe those factors from our profession. However, if it's low, it is discussed. And it really, when I'm in the room, I can kind of make sure they're aware of context and that, palliative care, for example, is a very specialty area, and those journal impacts may be a little lower. So it's certainly set in a context. And I will tell you, I think we all know there are issues around H impact factors. There's no perfect metric on this. And it's the same like numbers of publications. I don't want to say you have to have certain number of numbers. There's some guiding posts, but we don't get caught up on that. It's more about quality. Now, grants are huge, huge factor. People are going to look at, do you have funding currently? Have you a track record as a researcher for ongoing, sustained, that's the operative word, sustained funding? We particularly are interested in Tri-Council, but it's not the only one. Certainly if you have CIHR or National Cancer Institute of Canada, or if you have, other national, maybe heart and stroke, whatever, those are big those are big bodies of research. They're considered national bodies. And so that is an area of evidence towards national reputation and national impact. So we want to know where your funding's from. You need to document, there are charts for this, and it's on your CV, what your role is. We're looking to see if you're principal investigator. Co-principal investigator is okay. It would be helpful to know what your role is on the grant. And the other thing I want to really, and an authorship order, you're asked to put this, if you read the Faculty of Medicine promotions manual, they want you to indicate on the papers, in case you have some with students, what was your role. Now, one of the new things in the manual this year, and there's a whole national body dedicated to this. We're very interested, and again, from an equity point of view, many of you may be doing global research. And what has been happening, I think it's referred to as poaching, where really Western scientists were coming in and doing global work and putting themselves first in all the papers. So we're trying to get away from that. So we do recognize that there will be global CPA and global research where you're part of a very large team. And that might mean a lot of authors on a paper. What would be really helpful there is to understand your role. And if it is a situation where, because we're trying to promote this, where in fact you have put out a first author paper from someone from the local community, like India or China or some, a third world country somewhere. If you're doing work there, but you were very much part of the lead team or very much part of the research team, just make it really clear what your scholarly activity is and what your role was. The H index, I've talked about. I think Melanie will talk. There are other types of metrics like Almetrics. We do look at other ways of reviewing, but for research, it's mainly the grants and the peer review level publications. And then presentations are a lot. Workshops, academic presentations. We're going to look for, are they national organizations? Are they international conferences? Were they invited? Make sure you indicate whether they invited talks or scholarly peer-reviewed submitted abstracts. And again, this helps us examine the impact that your research is having. So assistant professor, just to go through the levels, Benoit talked about this, strong local reputation, you're contributing to research, you're a junior researcher, you should have some first author publications or senior author. You may also include authorship position on publications from collaborative research. And you are generally, there's some funding and you're starting out. This is, most of you are coming in researchers as assistant professor. But for associate, this tends to be about 5 or more years since you're assistant. There are exceptions. Benoit is a bit more conservative. He'd rather wait till it's a slam dunk. But I have seen some in decannal. Some every now and then there are just these stars, you know, coming through 2 or 3 years. And it does come up in the conversation. People debate this and they say, oh no, we should make them come back. Like, it's too soon. It's only 3 years since the last promotion. So be careful of that. But I usually, when I'm in the room, and I wouldn't be in the room for psychiatry, I usually say, like, really, are we really going to make this star? I mean, we don't know if they're sleeping. We don't know how they're doing all this, but are we really going to ask them after going through all this work to come back in a year? Because there is the odd one that is just unbelievable. So we have had some go through under 5 years, but Benoit is a little bit more conservative. He'll let you know what he thinks. Demonstrate independence. This is an issue for junior PhDs. I'm going to just raise that flag, or any MD for that matter. If you are working with a pioneer or giant in our field, and you've been maybe even a student with that person, be careful, because we need to see now where your independence is. So there are ways to handle it. Like sometimes you got to get people mentor around this. You got to get from out of the giant. Like you don't want to look like you're just the assistant or the junior researcher of somebody else's work. You need to show what is your part of it. If it is a strong team, what are you leading? What have you developed? So just be careful of that. And then we're looking for national levels. So this is just a general guide. High quality peer reviewed journals in your field, around 20 or so or more. I think Benoit said that. Evidence of funding and sustained funding at the national level. And I think about it this way, national impact or national reputation. So participation in, you know, symposia, don't forget you're going to be externally reviewed. People will probably know of you in the field. They're going to review the packages that Benoit sends them, and they're going to comment on the scholarly activity of your work. So you probably do have a reputation, and it may not be yet that you've had an impact nationally if it's a new technique. Maybe you're known for developing something that isn't yet in practice in another country or even across Canada. But again, we're looking for national reputation at least. And invited talks, invites to other provinces look like a national, could be 1 or 2 other provinces. You know, indication that people are starting to know you in the field. Now for full professor, this is a big package. Associate's pretty doable for a lot of people. You need time to plan for full professor. The dossiers are much larger. Again, usually at least 5, often longer, 5 to 7 years since the last promotion. Now we're looking for international reputation or impact. You're now up around 60, 70 or more publications, first senior author in most of them in medium to high impact journals. You have that sustained funding over time, and you're invited to national and international meetings. You have to show that. There may be national and international awards. You're invited to be doing peer review. And again, the same idea of the symposiums, or invited to consult. Like again, track everything and document it and do it as you're going forward, like start now. The other type of thing we're going to look at is, of course, this is important for full and associate teaching. You have to have at least level of competence. For some of the researchers, you may not be teaching in a classroom, but you're doing a lot of postdoctorate, graduate student, even undergrad. We look at everything, even mentorships of junior faculty. So document everything you're doing. There are charts in the manual. We don't want to see all the raw data, but we want the mean scores of your teaching. And I'm letting the PhDs know, or any of you doing any of this in the community sites, not everything is going to be in our MD. Is it called Power, John? Still, I think it is, the Power system. So the PhDs, for example, I've been telling them, you need to be collecting everything you do. John will talk about this. Every time you give a lecture, every time you're teaching whatever, even if you're teaching nurses or you're teaching public about diabetes or whatever you're doing, make sure it's evaluated. And start doing that now. And if that means you have to create your own evaluation form or get someone to help you, do it and get someone to bring it and give it out and get it back, because you need to show us your level of excellence or competence. You can't just list your teaching. You have to show that you're teaching. And you heard Benoit mention, there have been scientists. If you're doing no teaching at all in our department, or even at the Faculty of Medicine or somewhere at UT, you're not going to be able to go for promotion. So make sure you look for opportunities. And then count everything up. Some of you are doing administration, other types of university, hospital-wide committees. It counts. Be careful about doing too much of that and then you don't get your research done, but it all counts. We do look at that. And interaction, some of you will be working with patents or doing drug studies or looking at industry. And again, we need to know your role and the funding pattern and how you got the funding, and maybe you're a site PI, but we need to know more about the scholarly work that you're doing. And some researchers are crossing over more and more into CPA because that's so important to get your research into the community. And that's okay. Benoit will tell you to pick one route or the other, and you can still have a CPA dossier even if you're going primarily on research, or you still need to show how your research is crossing over or the types of education types of things you're doing because of your research. The letter of intent, you'll be asked to do a letter, and that will outline your story. And then it sets a tone, and so does Benoit's letter. Benoit does a long letter, and he tells your story and highlights your strengths and why you should be promoted. And he'll highlight things from your external referees. You'll be externally reviewed by people who know your field. And they can't know you. You can't have a conflict of interest. You can't have been taught by them and so forth. Really take a look at our manual. It's online. You can take a look at the research section. And yeah, I would say that the chair's letter really sets a tone for our reviewers. Here's just some examples. You'll see other charts. This is for the research. This is what the charts look like. You'll have your CV, but there's lots of charts in the manual on teaching and research and other things. Some of you will be getting research awards. You know, try and make sure you're getting nominated for research awards at national conferences or local too. They all count, local, national, international. Make sure that you develop relationships and don't be too shy. This isn't a time to be humble. Make sure that you're, you know, being recognized, and keep track of that as you're developing your career. And it's just good to create a chart like this and keep sticking this stuff in. This is another type of study. This is like research supervision. That goes a long way for the researchers. So again, we do look at, are you the primary supervisor, or are you on thesis committees, or are you supervising postdoctorate fellows? And you may also have letters from them, testimonials, and you may also show what they've gone on to do. Like some of your graduate students or your postdoc fellows or your MD trainees may have gone on to another city to set up something or set up their own lab. And that can be very helpful to see the impact of your training from a research point of view. And then, you know, it's another chart showing publications. This is all in the manual. You know, what was your authorship? You know, they're summary tables. People look at that. They count this stuff up. They look at mean scores. So I think I'm nearly done. The terms of the review process, each of you will have 2 reviewers, not in your field. No conflict of interest. They are going to, I always think they're your advocate. They have to kind of present it a little bit like a thesis committee, why you should. They're going to tell your story to the whole group of 15 or 16 of us. And they will summarize your contributions in research, education, and teaching. They will comment on the activity if you're doing administration or leadership. They're going to bring out your strengths, but they are going to say things like, I'm not sure about this. I think they're on the line for this. Or maybe they're going to say it's a slam dunk, a wonderful dossier, make sure it's easy to find things, wonderful dossier, no problem, met the bar. Some of you may be more in the line, and then we have a discussion. And at the end of the day, there's 2 reviewers. There's a first reviewer, then we ask the second reviewer what he or she thought. Same idea, they add on to the discussion, then we vote. And we vote to promote, to defer, meaning we need more information. And at that point, Benoit is invited to come and sort of act as your defense person, right? He needs to come and clarify. You will be asked to clarify or provide more details on something that we weren't clear about. And then we make a recommendation after that second meeting to the dean. And he usually goes with our recommendations. Occasionally he doesn't, but generally he relies on the decanal promotion. I think just to clarify where people get derailed, not as much in research, because usually they're pretty sure whether they're ready or not. If there's not enough evidence, on research scholarship or the impact of your research at a national or international level. If we don't understand independence, that can be tricky, especially if you're involved in large team grants. It's okay to be in large team grants, just make sure we understand your role and what you did. Failure to make the bar for national or international impact or reputation. Maybe we don't understand your role. And again, sustained funding, looked like you had it for a while, but now you don't have a grant. What's going on? Now, sometimes, you know, CHR went through quite a rough patch. Sometimes, you know, we're pretty empathic, like this year's COVID, it might come up in our meetings. Or maybe there are too many small grants and they're local. People may wonder why there aren't national grants. But I will say that we do consider qualitative research, and educational grants may not be large grants, and qualitative studies don't need often a huge amount of money. And so I try to set the tone around that. But again, we at least need national reputation in your research and international reputation in what you're doing with those small grants. Applying too early, I think with Benoit, it's highly unlikely because he doesn't like to put through people early. And then lack of competence or excellence in teaching, that you're not doing enough, or we can't see from the scores, or you don't even have outcomes. Like, it's not enough to just list teaching. You've got to show how good it is, you know, the quality. And I know John will talk more about it. Yeah, that's my slide. So I don't know if there is time or not, John, for questions. I'll be sticking around at the end too, but happy to take them, whatever you think in terms of.
I've been mainly answering the questions in the chat. There's a question from someone about the references. So there are external reviewers that go with every file. So these are the department will send out your file basically to people in your field that don't have a conflict of interest. They're not sort of a close collaborator or a mentor or something like that, but someone who knows the context of your work and can assess how impactful it is, right? They may know of you, they may have heard you present something, but they shouldn't be a close collaborator. And the reviewers of your files do depend on those external reviews to be able to provide sort of more evidence of the impact you're having in your field and the kind of breadth of that impact as well. So they're not references in the sense that they're not people that you pick. You can't really pick them yourself because typically you then be picking people who you know, right? You can sometimes suggest people who are kind of in the field but not a close person, just to sort of give an idea of who's out there. But really, it's about people who don't have a conflict of interest who can still assess your work. And we will actually defer applications where the external reviewers are felt to be too much in a conflict. So that is something that happens. So it's really important that those external reviewers are not someone who is close to you in a way that would be perceived as a conflict. Are there other questions? So there's a question about teaching. So I'm going to talk about teaching elsewhere in my section. So I'll get to that in a bit.
I did want to mention something about peer review because it's tricky, and Benoit feels strongly, and a lot of this depends on your mentorship. You should aim high. Be careful. You know, those of you who are primary researchers, I'm sure your mentors, hopefully you learned this. Go for the highest impact journals you can. But, you know, Benoit always says, if you get rejected, then try the next tier. Like, but be careful about going too low impact every time. Just be careful about that. I try to talk a lot about context. It's a bugaboo I have that people think, oh, it all has to be American Journal, you know, New England Journal, whatever. That's great when you have those. They count so much, right? But just be careful that you're not aiming high enough. It's a bit of an issue with some junior researchers who aren't getting proper mentorship to know to do that. I'm just kind of putting that out there if you're a researcher, scientist.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Mary Jane. I know you're
welcome.
And answer further questions. So
I'll be here at the end. I'll be around. So
okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, thanks, guys.
All right. So we're going to take another short break while Melanie can get set up with her slides. So take another minute or two to do whatever you need to take a break from the screen, walk around, get a beverage, whatever you need to do. And Melanie, when you're ready, you can set up your slides and share screen, and we'll just make sure that they're working okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, looks great. So why don't we just give people another minute or so before we start formally, okay?
Mhm.
Okay, Melanie, so why don't we begin with your section, which is, I think, a really important topic to cover for people, because I think creative professional activity is often the one that causes the most questions about what is it and how do you best document it, particularly your impact. So I think it's a really important area because there's lots of people doing it who may not even fully realize that they're doing it. So it's great that you can help shed some more light on this. Okay.
Okay, just give me so it's 2:53. What time do you want me to stop? So I know.
Roughly around kind of 2:30, 3:30, 3:35-ish in that ballpark, but go ahead.
All right. I think that should be fine. One of the questions that I noticed on the chat, people were saying, well, how are people going to know from my citations that I'm the senior author or what my responsibility was? So the standard way of doing that is to use the acronyms SRA for senior responsible author in brackets beside your name, or collaborating author or co-author. So, and you can indicate that in your CV if it's unclear, because, you know, depending on the type of science you do, sometimes senior author is first author all the time, sometimes it's last author, and it can get confusing. So that's a standard that has been used in the past. So I'm going to be talking today about CPA, and my experience has been that I've been on the promotions committee. I'm on my second round on the promotions committee. So I feel I've earned my stripes. I have quite a bit of experience in knowing what the hits and misses are. So I'm going to be sharing some of that with you today. So I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you're going to have something of a framework in your mind that will enable you to capture your impacts for your creative professional activities. So you'll be able to outline them. And I have included in my slide deck a little sort of logic model worksheet that you can take out of the slide deck at the end to get you going. So as you've already heard from Mary Jane, you know, there's the whole research portfolio. You're going to hear from John about the teaching portfolio, and this is the third portfolio. And as Jane mentioned, you might feel that you are actively involved in all three of these, but the job really is to figure out where you're strongest and to go forward on excellence in that particular area. So these criteria have already been outlined for you by Mary Jane very well in terms of what the research criteria are for the portfolio. John's going to talk to you about the teaching criteria, and there is some overlap with respect to teaching criteria between teaching dossier and CPA dossier. And typically that overlap exists in teaching that you do for professionals. So professional development might also be an aspect of CPA. So what is CPA? CPA is really recognizing that we have a dynamic actually between the work that we do in academia and in science and what goes on in the world around us in terms of community, in terms of policy, in terms of health systems, and so on. And these activities that we interact with sometimes can take quite a bit of time in your career. Where you might be teaching, you might be doing research, but you might be doing a whole bunch of other things that are at that interface with non-academics and people outside the academic world. The CPA dossier is an effort to capture that in a structured way. And so in the Faculty of Medicine, we have 3 buckets for CPA. One is professional innovation and creative excellence. The second is contributions to the development of professional practices, because this is a clinical department pretty much. And then exemplary professional practice. And we can talk about the 3 of these. Mostly what you want to be doing, and Mary Jane's touched on this, is your CPA, when you talk about your career in this way, or even when you speak to people about your career, you want to be telling a story. And it's about conceiving of a narrative. And as you are working through all of your dossiers and you're kind of putting together and thinking and reflecting on your career, depending on your own personal style, it might be useful to do this on a bunch of sticky notes. It might be useful to do this on a big sheet of paper and kind of try and capture your career graphically. Where have you put your emphases in research? How does that map to your teaching? How does that map to your CPA, so that you have a big picture of that? But what you're trying to capture is what you've done. No, sorry, wrong order. Why you did it. And that's really important, because that's the narrative piece. We can all demonstrate and have great prowess at demonstrating our productivity. That's what's in your CV. I've done all these things. And you can start to list even your knowledge translation activities. But the task here is not just to list them, it's to talk about them in a way that is engaging, relates to purpose, and in a way in which you can demonstrate benefits. Those are your impacts. Many people, and what we see time and time again, will give us a long laundry list of things that they have done in the knowledge translation and sort of CPA sphere, and they have nothing to show for what came of what they did. So those of you who are in the early stages of your career and maybe not going forward right away have time to collect all of those indicators of impact and benefit and engagement and so on. Do it prospectively is probably a great lesson learned for everybody, so that you have it. Even if it's not well organized and you've stuffed it all into an electronic file and a paper file, when they've come in, you at least have some evidence, some documentation that you can pull together when you need it. So what did you do? Why did you do it? Were you successful? And by successful, what we're looking for is the so what piece. So you did all of this great stuff, and how did it help anybody? How did it help the system? What came of it? How can you demonstrate to us that this was worthwhile? And you want to describe and back up your claims of impact. So don't just leave it hanging as in, this is what I did, but be able to complete the whole story. So you're addressing the so what, which is the last piece. And somehow my slide has gone screwy. You also want to talk about your method in terms of, you know, what did you actually do and what was your role in it? So your CPA requires a documentation of scholarship, but it also involves self-promotion. Self-promotion is something that some people roll their eyes at, other people puff out their chests and do a great job of it. Some other people are a little shy, don't like to talk about their accomplishments, feel like it's perhaps not well accepted. Look, you got to learn how to do it and do it well. So, you know, as Rachel Connolly says, one of the biggest myths of academia is that you only have to be smart enough and publish in JAMA and have good ideas to succeed. And that's not the case. It's a big part of it, but it's not the case. So people need access to your work. They got to find it. If it's hidden away somewhere, it's not doing anybody any good. And a lot of our work is hidden away somewhere. You want people to engage with it when they do find it. You want them to understand it the first time they engage with it, not struggle. Is it written for them? Are you producing a deliverable that is for that particular targeted audience, and that it benefits them in some way? And so that's the whole sort of journey of your most of the knowledge translation activities that are going to exist and be discussed in this dossier. So a large piece of your dossier is really a narrative. It's an evidence-based document that describes more than what you've done, so not just the productivity deliverables, but also describes how you've had an impact through the community-engaged scholarship, the knowledge translation, the interaction with policy, whatever that may be. What has the impact actually been? So it's a little bit of marketing and it's a little bit of public relations. So marketing is telling other people about yourself and why what you're doing is so fantastic. You got to learn how to do that in a way that doesn't come across as annoying. And public relations is having other people talk about you. So that means good networking, making sure that you scaffold up, making sure that your colleagues know what you're up to. So as you're doing your knowledge translation, don't forget about the people closest to you and around you and in your environment and related environments so that they know what you're doing and can make connections, can broker new connections for you because they might be talking to somebody and think, oh, well, I know a person who does work in this area and that might be a great opportunity for collaboration, for research, or for other purposes. And in order to accomplish this, you have to get good at being really clear on what you do, why it's important, why it's relevant, to whom it's relevant, and how all of this work benefits other people. So you want both the self-promotion and sort of the public relations and the marketing piece. So the purpose of CPA is really to drive us academics to really kind of get out of our little circles and start to remember and interact and exchange with people who live out there all around us. And it's, you know, it is a bit foreign. It is more advanced as a recognized promotion criteria in some circles. Not every university recognizes this in the same way or to the same extent. But traditional scholarly practice is really focused on that academic loop, right? It's your CV, it's your research, it's your teaching, it's the scholarship in these sorts of areas, it's your academic leadership. And we are incentivized to recognize productivity in these areas. I'm not suggesting for a moment that is not important. It is, but it's not the only thing that's important because we do all of these things in service of what's happening in the other loop, the other side of the loop, which is largely speaking the community. And for a long time, we've been discouraged focus too much on that because, gosh, it's going to take away from your time and it's not necessarily valued. There's really a big move to having a more expansive view of what scholarship is, what it entails, and how inclusive it is in terms of who we engage with and the work that we do. So CPA is an effort to try and revamp that terrain. And reward people who are doing that back and forth dance with communities and stakeholders outside of academia. So what are the criteria for CPA? And so one of the things I'd be doing as I'm sort of working either with my big sketch pad or my sticky notes is thinking through where do my accomplishments lie in these three areas. So the first is professional innovation and creative excellence. And that includes things like what you have invented or your patents or your licenses, new techniques you may have developed. They might be therapeutic techniques. They might be teaching techniques. They might be new devices or things that are commercialized. Your educational programs outside of the university in terms of your educational efforts for other professionals and in continuing education. Patient education would be included here as well. The second bucket are contributions to the development of your professional practice. So an invention, a technique, a conceptual innovation that needn't be something that is ready for instrumental use. It could be a new understanding of, I don't know, a different attachment category comes out of the blue all of a sudden or something like that. It has to be documentable contribution that is illustrative to students and peers, recognized by peers as excellence, emulated by others, or impacting practice in some way. And then the third bucket is exemplary professional practice. So this is leadership in your profession, in your professional organizations, on policy tables, where you have an opportunity to influence standards, enhance effectiveness, develop guidelines, influence policy. You might be involved in the development of consensus statements or regulatory committees. So that will also fit in your CPA dossier, but here it will be important to state your role and your relative contribution to the tasks undertaken by that committee or that group. So at U of T, our CPA assessment generally guided by some key principles. It's usually, the work that you're doing alongside your research and your teaching. You sort of exist in a particular space, and sometimes you take your interests, your passion, and your expertise into the knowledge translation and CPA space. So there will be linkages to teaching, there will be linkages to research, and that's fine. It's obviously going to be related to your discipline, relevant to your appointment at the University of Toronto. If I, on the side, happen to be, I don't know, fantastic creative artist, that does no bearing on my CPA. There should be evidence of sustained and current activity. This is not a one-time blip in your academic career. This is something you've done over a period of time that has some gravitas to it, some volume. You should be focusing on things like your creativity and your innovation and your excellence and the impact on the profession or the impact or benefits on the people to whom these activities are directed or with whom these activities are included. It's not on the quantity of the achievement. I know I just said it has to be sustained and current, just to sort of counterbalance that, but we make oftentimes a big fuss about quantity over quality. And my example here is Marie Curie. If you think about how many papers she would have needed to write in order to reach excellence, wasn't all that many given what she accomplished. So again, I'm not saying don't write papers. I'm just saying, think about, what you're writing, who you're trying to reach. Do think about the journals, but also think about how you can reach people in other ways and how that might be a contribution to your CPA. You want to be able to make sure there's evidence that whatever your activities are, they've benefited policymaking. I think the actual language in our criteria are changed. I don't like that because I think that the emphasis is too much on instrumental use. We develop a lot of new discoveries that are not either ready for instrumental use at a given time or are not that kind of evidence. So it's more important to demonstrate how people benefit from your evidence than how they might use it per se. Maybe they do, but just broadening that concept a little bit. So how is it benefiting them in their policy making, in their decision making, in their clinical practice, and so on? So some of these discoveries may have commercial gain, but they must also have evidence of scholarship and impact. It's not enough to just, develop something and sell it and not do anything scholarly around it. So be mindful about that. Our metrics for assessing CPA, clear goals, and this is what people miss most of the time when they describe any kind of community engagement or knowledge translation activities they've undertaken. They will tell you who it was directed to, and they will tell you what strategies they used and perhaps what deliverable they created. But what's missing typically is what was the intent? What was the purpose? Sort of Simon-centric kind of purpose. Why are you doing it? And if you know why you are doing something, trust me, you will have much greater impact than if you're just doing something by rote because you have to. So clear goals, adequate preparation, appropriate methods, and effective knowledge translation, which means knowing the purpose, targeting to your audience, using the right strategies for the right moment and the right purpose, and evaluating whether you actually attained those dissemination goals or those knowledge translation goals. And then ongoing reflective critique over the course of the activities in which you're doing. So when I talk about knowledge translation goals and sort of why are you sharing information and doing these CPA sorts of things, you may be doing this dissemination to generate awareness and interest, to share knowledge. We obviously have a whole bunch of things we do to inform research, and that'll be evident in your CV. We share to inform decision-making, to facilitate practice change sometimes when the evidence is ready and when our discoveries lend themselves to that utility, to facilitate policy change or behavior in the public, and also technology transfer and commercialization. So these are all purposes or aims of our CPA activity. You want to be documenting your CPA, and that means know your why. I don't think I have time to show this video, so I'll include the link. But where's your passion? What is the reason behind what you are doing? Tell a story, connect the dots, make it easy for reviewers to see the value you've created. So when you talk about your work, watch a couple of TED Talks to get a sense of how to distill it. It's a lot harder than you think, but it's the sort of thing that you need to practice, but is an important skill to have. Document over your career and demonstrate benefits and impacts, the who, what, the how, etc., and the what for. And link your CPA to your research productivity and your teaching to show that alignment and the scholarship. So when I say evaluate, what do I mean? How do I evaluate? And people kind of get a little lost with the evaluation piece. So to some extent, scholarly publications are an evaluation metric, yes. Your invitations to things, whether you're invited to be a visiting professor or a scholar, a visiting scholar, invitations to meetings, invitations to workshops, invitations to editorial boards, invitations to working groups as an expert. Just hold on to all of this stuff. Invitations for talks and interviews with the media, for lay publications, non-peer reviewed and lay publications. Yes, they don't carry the same gravitas as the journals, but they serve a really important purpose, because if you think about it, the work you might be doing might be hugely beneficial to people outside of academia, but they have no way of accessing it. They have no way of knowing that this work is ongoing. what is being learned, how that might impact key informed decision-making that they have to do, or even their knowledge. Where are they going to find this information? And so CPA is where you do that work, and you can document the exposure, the audience, and the impacts. Are you involved in developing or influencing health policies in some ways? It includes presentations, reports, dissemination of educational innovations, media. You can see all of this for yourself here, but there's a whole bunch there. So some of the CPA pitfalls. So if you've sort of tuned me out by now, you want to tune back in because this part is really important. This is where people drop the ball. Poor documentation. Failure to state your accomplishment and provide evidence of the impact. If you didn't track it or measure it moving forward, it's really hard to go back and pick up those pieces. So make sure that for everything you do, you have a clear idea of why you're doing it, what you hope the benefits will be for the people who it's directed to, whether it's a talk or a network table or whatever, and how are you going to know that those benefits were realized to some degree. And I'll give you some ideas in the slides that follow that I won't go through pedantically, of what sorts of things you can quote unquote measure. So that's one of the big things that we see is people will list a whole bunch of things they did and they're kind of out there in the atmosphere floating. Not identifying your particular contribution to a group activity. You don't want to be doing that either. So what did you do? Were you a leader and how was that demonstrated? You really got to reflect on some of these activities and think this through. Not demonstrating scholarly activity, that's sort of a bit like number one, but making sure that you have that opportunity for critical appraisal and reflection and peer review and those sorts of things. Again, not impacting your CPA, so simply stating what you did, not describing how, who and how people benefited from your CPA, and not highlighting your, not really appreciating how to highlight your impact nationally and internationally. So for associate, you need to demonstrate your impact nationally. So through invitations, through recognitions of different, through collaborations, research and otherwise. Are people inviting you? Do people recognize across Canada that you are an expert in this field? How would you show that? And for a full professor, the onus is on you to demonstrate international recognition. Same thing applies. So some reminders for you as you build your CPA dossier. Check the fullness of your citations in Scopus. I include an H index from Scopus and from Google Scholar in my CV. We will be looking at the Scopus H index. The Google Scholar one just makes me feel better because it's always bigger. But you want to be checking that your Scopus citations, and your Scopus citations are going to be more limited. They won't include as many things as you will see in your Google Scholar list. They are more curtailed by date and by type of output. But there might be some outputs missing, particularly if you've changed your name or you've changed your institution. You just want to be checking. I think I appear as Melanie Barwick, Sick Kids, and Melanie Barwick, U of T, and you can contact, I think it's Elsevier, and they will merge your different people, the different parts of you on their system. Anyway, check it, get in touch with them if something's missing and they have a particular process to follow there where they'll verify it and add it accordingly if it's appropriate. Don't confuse impact with scholarly productivity. So don't just describe, but rather describe your impacts and contributions, etc. One of the things people sometimes ask about international recognition, does that mean, for instance, if I develop a new, I don't know, a new methodology here, or a new therapeutic approach in Canada? And does it have to be adopted internationally? And my answer to that, maybe others on the team have different answers, but my answer is no, it doesn't need to be something that's adopted, but it does need to be recognized. And it, you know, you might get invited to talk about it in Australia or in Scandinavia somewhere, or in Britain or the US. It doesn't mean they have to have scaled up your new innovation. So it's really reputational impact that we're looking for here. Plan for knowledge translation prospectively. If you don't plan for it, you don't know really what you're doing or why you're doing it. And you won't really have a clear plan for how you're going to evaluate its impact. So I highly recommend this. We have at Sick Kids our specialists, now renamed Specialist Knowledge Translation Training, that can help you. It's a 2-day training. We'll teach you how to develop a dissemination plan so that you can do this in an intentional, explicit, standardized way and collect the data that you're going to need over the course of your career. And if you're doing implementation work, we have methodologies for that as well. And add your impacts to all your deliverables, including your social media metrics. So that's important. So when I talk about impact, I'm really speaking not about an outcome. This many people came to my training or this many people bought my book. I'm talking about, and how did that book change their lives? I'm talking about the more qualitative aspects of that. So can you tell a story or show that people knew what to do with the knowledge you shared, or that they somehow benefited from it? That's what you want to be capturing. So what can you be using as your indicators of impact? Well, we typically, because much of what we disseminate is through the internet, we fall on the luxury of the reach indicators that are so close at hand. So, who downloaded this? Where did it go? Where are they in the world? A lot of descriptive information that summarizes nicely numerically and makes us look really impactful. And to a point, that's good, but it doesn't tell you what people did with the information once they accessed it, or how that information might have informed their decision-making or shaped their practice or done anything impactful and beneficial for them. So you want to be thinking about how to do a bit of a deeper dive so you could tell that story. Quality indicators, you want to be able to say how many people actually read or browsed my report or my the summary of our research findings or the description of our new intervention. Were they satisfied? Did they see it as useful or usable? Did they gain any knowledge? Did it change their views or their attitudes or the way they approach any aspect of their lives? Those would be important ways of doing that. Use indicators. Are they intending to use something that you've shared, that you've developed through your research work? Are they adopting something and perhaps seeking permission to adapt it to their context, to a different population? That would be a useful indicator to know. How are they using the information that you've shared in their context in terms of trying to meet their needs and their goals? Sometimes we do a lot of work in terms of collaboration and capacity building. And so there are a couple of tools that will help us capture that. We do cover this off in our specialist KT training in greater depth, but you can assess partnerships in terms of the quality of the partnerships and the benefits of those partnerships. You might assess the usefulness of evidence-based dissemination on the web by information assessment method that Pierre Pluy at McGill has developed, which we're now using to get a little further with how people benefit from our About Kids Health website at Sick Kids, for instance. So there are ways to get a little deeper. You just have to think about them as you're planning it out. And then the following pages of the slide deck really just go through a laundry list of different impact indicators that might be suitable and appropriate for the work that you're doing and for capturing some dimension of impact. And I'm not going to go through them all. There's just a slew of different things. So I think the last thing I want to touch on, how we're doing for time, we're getting there, is altmetrics. So these are relatively new, but you will have seen this little graphic swirly in probably some of the journals that you're accessing, or perhaps on other social media sites. And that altmetric indicator is a measure of attention.
I mean, you as instructor, it's totally up to you, but at the same
Can
time,
you guys please mute? Thank you. So it's a measure of attention. So who's looking at it, who's touching it, who's sending it around, who's continuing to create, further spread. And so the higher the number, the more attention it's getting. And we want attention. We want people to be finding our work, understanding our work, engaging with our work so that they can benefit from it. It's really nice paper not that long ago by Daniel Cabrera in the United States on social media scholarship and altmetrics for academic promotion and tenure. I think we sort of lean in this direction as well. I've included here sort of their consensus statement on social media scholarship, how they've defined it, what process they use, what indicators they look for in terms of social media engagement. Just on the world scene, not that long ago came the Declaration on Research Assessment, the DORA Declaration, which recognizes the need to improve the ways in which outputs of scholarly research are evaluated, and that might be of interest to you. You can have a look at that on the web as well. Couple of other little tricks up the sleeve might be things like Impact Story, which is an open source web-based tool that goes and pulls all the altmetrics to help you measure the impacts of your research outputs. So it'll give you, I just went and pulled mine, not because it's stellar, but just to give you an example of what you'll see. So it shows your achievements, your timeline, your publications, and the impacts for your different publications. And, one of the things you might consider doing, I don't think it's a sustainable thing, but in your CV where you're listing your publications, is you may want to include some impact indicators there. So citation metrics, but also an altmetric in terms of social media engagement. So this is an example of one that in my CV from many years ago now, how I listed my my citation with an impact, and the impact here is a reach metric, what the altmetric score was, and where to find it. So, I mean, it's not something that you can keep going on a rolling basis as your CV changes over the years, but I think for purposes of your CV for your dossier and your promotion application, that might be a worthwhile thing to do. This is just what it looks like if you click on the little swirly. This was our BMJ paper. It'll give you greater details on where in the world people are looking at this paper, and you can pull as much information, just quite a bit of detail there, and you can use that in any way you might see fit. We have a planning template that we share in the specialist KT training that's available to anybody as a free download to help you plan for your knowledge translation in a systematic way. This is just the cover page. It's about 4 pages long. And this is my little worksheet that I offer you in terms of trying to capture, what did you do? Why did you do it? What was your role? Why you want to share this work. So what was the knowledge translation goal? What was the purpose? And then what are the evaluation metrics that are both feasible and make sense to capture for whether you actually attained that knowledge translation goal? So you can use the same sort of a table to work this out for your own work. So there are a couple of people other than me in the Department of Psychiatry that are around and available to help you. I think Carol is probably still on the list. I know Mary Jane knows an awful lot about this. I'm hoping it's okay to list Sophie, Bob, and Paula, because originally they were sort of, we were all more engaged with one another when this was first sort of being structured and implemented in our CPA, in our promotion procedures, but we're around and happy to field an email here or there and provide some guidance. And that's my contact information. And I'm sure there are some questions, but I have not been following while I've been speaking. So I'm happy to take a few moments before John's turn and answer some questions.
So that was great. I'd been responding to some of the questions as we've been going along, but I don't know if there's any additional questions.
Over here in the chat.
Some additional questions that people would like to ask Melanie as well. So I can either type in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll let Melanie.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really helpful, Melanie. So really appreciate it. This may be a naive question. So I know Altmetric, its kind of ability to show that score for any given paper. Is that it? Or I was just wondering, does it also give you a metric for if you kind of give your name and the body of your work? Like
I think Story will do that for you. So I didn't rely on that when I was doing mine, but I think that that's their raison d'être. I think that's their purpose, is to kind of pull all your social media metrics into.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
Yeah. But
you're saying so both would be important. So with your papers, you can consider adding the altmetric to some of the papers that are worth mentioning, I suppose. And then with the impact story, I have never heard about it, but that's one that could sort of give a metric for your impact, the totality of your work.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, if I publish a paper and it quietly gets published and I don't promote it in any way, it probably will take years for people to find it. I mean, go and look at when I get those notifications now that say, oh, someone read your paper, they're from papers that I wrote 15 years ago, not, the most recent ones, because this stuff takes time. And that's the reason that the H index is, just in my own opinion, not necessarily a great indicator of your scholarly future. I mean, if you happen to have been on one of these papers and lucked out because, it just went viral, then yippee, your index is going to go through the roof. But for most of us, it's a very slow and steady climb, so don't feel bad. And there is no benchmark. I've never heard of a benchmark for that sort of thing. It's sort of a rough benchmark. But the reality is, if you tweet your paper around and you promote it and you actively promote it, you will drive more traffic to it, which is what you want, so that your productivity indicators actually look better. I know people are going to say that's extra work. That's just, I can't keep my promotion going as, on the side, but there are tools to use. Like I use buffer.com, and you can set up your tweets to happen on a schedule. So, set them up to go at different times where it's just a repeat of your paper and little things about your paper, and it's set up to go for the week. You don't have to look at it again.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Other questions for Melanie? So I want to thank you again, Melanie. I find it always helpful to hear your presentation over and over again. So we always
compliment. You've heard it quite a few times now. Thank you. Thanks, John.
No, it's very clear, and just so people know, we are making all of these slide decks available for people afterwards, so you can have a chance to read through all the details and get to all the links that she also has provided. That's all very excellent. Okay, so I'm going to give you all again a few minutes just to sort of take a break, do whatever you need to do. I'll set up my slides and we'll start in a couple minutes. Okay. So Mary Jane, just in case you're still watching, if while I'm doing my presentation, I won't be able to pay attention as much to the chat, so you can always let me know if there's questions I should address.
Yeah, I'll do that, John. That's fine. I'm here. Makes it easier.
Okay, so as people are sort of maybe filtering back in, I'll just say a couple of things in introduction. So first of all, although my slides have been shared as part of the materials, I also wrote a Word document as well that covers the things that I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail. So it's basically tips for creating a teaching dossier. As the document will be in the share file link that you've got. So if you want to sort of have a reference for what I cover, I would encourage you to look more so at the Word document rather than my slide deck, which is really just an abridged version of what's in the Word document. Okay. So, so I'm going to talk now about preparing a teaching dossier for promotion, and really kind of trying to emphasize things that can make a dossier more effective, and basically to help ensure that the people who are reviewing it can really understand what you've been doing in terms of your teaching and education and sort of the quality of it and its impact. I'll remind people again that your dossier is being reviewed by people who don't necessarily know psychiatry or what happens in kind of the teaching that is done in psychiatry and in mental health areas. So it's really important that you keep that in mind as you're preparing your materials, so that someone else who's not sort of really in the thick of what you do can understand it and appreciate what you're doing. So always remember that that's your audience. And in particular, you also want to make it easier for the person who's reviewing your dossier to really kind of get the key messages out of it. The harder that someone has to look for things and understand things and so on, the less likely you're going to actually be able to transmit your message and and the quality of what you're doing. So that's a sort of a key basic point that I would want to make. So you've already heard about sort of the promotion requirements, and with regards to if you're going forward primarily on education, as mentioned before, there are essentially mainly two pathways there. There is excellence in education, which means either sustained excellence in teaching, which is like you're essentially really just a star teacher, just doing fantastic teaching for usually a significant number of years, or you are doing excellence in scholarship in teaching education. So that is things like innovations in teaching education, excellence in terms of awards and high scores and evaluations, scholarship and other kinds of research in education. You're showing really kind of efforts to improve your teaching, you're improving the teaching of others, you're doing leadership and administration, and you're doing mentorship. These are all kinds of demonstrations of that excellence. Now, as mentioned before, if you're not going forward on teaching as your primary sort of focus, you still need to demonstrate competence in teaching nonetheless. So so for those of you, for example, who might be going forward on CPA or going forward on research, you still have to submit a teaching dossier. It's just that what they're looking for is not quite as high a bar. They want to see that you're teaching and you're contributing and that you are doing teaching well, but you don't necessarily have to be at the top of the heap or anything like that. So there's the promotions manual really kind of outlines kind of what is meant by competence, and it basically just means that you know the area that you're teaching, you know the content area well, you're communicating it effectively, you're using teaching methods that are going to really be helpful and effective with your learners. You establish a positive learning environment that's obviously non-abusive and really contributes to people being able to flourish and learn when they're with you. If you're assessing students, you're also assessing them effectively, you're able to provide appropriate feedback. And you do things to sort of improve your teaching where appropriate. So for example, if you get maybe some lower ratings or some more negative comments, that you're able to show that you are able to respond to that and improve that area in a meaningful way. And we've already talked about the levels of requirements. I'm not going to go over that again. So this first tip seems like so totally obvious, and I can tell you that I don't know why it is, but some people just don't seem to read the promotion manual, or at least don't read it in detail. Because really, the promotion manual tells you how to lay it out for the reviewer. The reviewer will look for the stuff that the promotion manual is asking for. So look, if you're from the point of view of the teaching dossier, look in section 3.3, which is the teaching and education section. Look for what they're asking for. Look for the kinds of things you need to describe that will demonstrate to the reviewer that you are either providing excellence or you're providing competence in teaching. So start with that and kind of frame how you provide the information in your dossier attending to those kinds of points. It's really very helpful, because then, as a reviewer, if you're going through stuff and everything is being presented not in that kind of standard format or not addressing those particular points that you're looking for, then you have to really start digging and looking for things, and that becomes much more challenging, and very possible then the reviewer may not simply see the value in what you're doing, or at least not fully appreciate it. So take the time to read the relevant section of the promotion manual about teaching and education, so that you're constructing a dossier that is actually highlighting what people are looking for when they're reviewing things. You do need to also maintain a particular teaching log or data summary sheet. It's one of the sheets that is required. You saw similar things for research, and so this is something that everyone has to fill out. And the key, I would say, there is just start filling it out now, or as soon as possible. It is so hard to kind of retrospectively recreate this like 5 years later. So unless you've kept track of it somehow otherwise. So if you can sort of start to keep track using these data sheets about who you're teaching, when, how long you've been doing it, it's just so much easier to kind of track all that in an ongoing way. It doesn't take that long to kind of add to it. It takes a lot longer to go back years later and try to figure it out. So keep in mind this data summary sheet. All these data summary sheets are available on the Faculty of Medicine Promotions webpage. So you can download them and start filling them in and keeping track of things. So I think Mary Jane had mentioned this issue earlier, but this is a really important point. So many of you, if you were teaching, say, medical students or residents, there are standard evaluations that are completed by these students that become part of MedSys or POWER. And so the evaluation process of your teaching is really kind of taken care of. However, not all other areas of teaching have similarly centralized forms of evaluation. And so it's really important that you, as a faculty member, ensure that some kind of evaluation is happening. Now, sometimes it's just simply a matter of asking. If you're like, I don't know, like going and providing grand rounds at some other hospital, maybe they're already doing an evaluation anyways. You just need to make sure that they're doing it, and then you would get a summary of the evaluation. So maybe it's already being done. It's being gathered in some other way, and so you just need to make sure that you confirm that and then get a hold of that. But there may be other things that you're doing in a teaching capacity where there is no formal evaluation process that happens. And so that's where being able to use kind of your own evaluation form or some other way of getting feedback on the teaching is really valuable. You can kind of create basically your own evaluation form, or you can even create like a simple SurveyMonkey survey that gets emailed out to all the participants to evaluate your presentation and give you feedback on your teaching. So just to give you a simple example, like, you know, I did a seminar for the staff at a rural hospital in Northern Ontario. And so I just simply sent out a simple email. And so I emailed out a SurveyMonkey survey. It was, I think, like 4 or 5 questions, just basically asking about what they thought of my teaching and an opportunity to give them open-ended comments. And so that's just at least a way to demonstrate that that teaching has been valued by other people. So again, for the more centralized university-based teaching that you do, there's often centralized mechanisms to gather all that evaluation. But if it's not that, then you should find out if there is any evaluation and provide some method of gathering that feedback yourself. The theme you've heard from everyone is save anything and everything. And so that can be really important from a teaching point of view as well. If you've been creating material for teaching, for example, save that stuff. Particularly if it's stuff that ultimately some people start to use otherwise. So if you've created a curriculum or created curriculum materials that other people find really valuable and want to borrow so that they can teach the same topic area, for example, it's A, great to show that you've created the material, and B, great to save evidence that they also are now taking your material and using it as well. So similarly, kind of any kind of email evidence or other kind of paper trail that shows that people value what you're teaching and your teaching materials and so on, save all of that because that can be really helpful. Spontaneous kind of thank you cards even can be helpful if you mean lots of those kinds of things. Anything that really kind of shows that people are appreciating and valuing your teaching is worth saving. So save it all. You can then sort through it to see how much is the most important stuff, but save it all initially so that you at least have that material at hand. Sometimes a good trick I find is if you're giving presentations elsewhere, you can put up your email and ask people to email you if they want your slides or if they want your materials. And the reason why that's great is then you've got email evidence that someone really valued your presentation. They often say, like, thank you so much for a great presentation. I really found such and such an aspect really helpful. Could you please share your slides or please share your tool that you developed or whatever it is? That is just really nice evidence of the value of that presentation and the fact that someone is wanting to kind of further engage in your material. So just a simple kind of trick to do, for example, to gather some of that information. So teaching awards are another measure of kind of your teaching ability, and they're kind of useful to go into a dossier particularly. And the important thing to know is that not all teaching, so some teaching awards are learner driven. The learners will nominate you spontaneously, and so that is how they sort of are initiated. But there are actually a number of other education awards that are essentially things you have to apply for, or you have to get someone to nominate you other than a learner. So this maybe harkens back a little bit to Melanie's point about sort of self-promotion. Sometimes in order to get the recognition that you might really deserve, you have to take a bit of initiative around it. And so the department actually has kept track of like all of the different, or many of the different teaching and education awards that exist, not only in the local system, but more broadly, regionally, nationally, internationally. And so, so there may be awards that you really would qualify for given what you've been doing in your teaching, and but you may need to initiate some of that application process or even help put together the package that's needed for that application. So it's an important conversation to have, you know, with people who could be helpful in that nomination process. Maybe it's your chief, maybe it's an education leader in your area, but try not to be too shy about this aspect because it can really actually be helpful to demonstrate about your the quality of your teaching and how that teaching is being recognized. So we have an education council in the department that regularly reviews the possibility of nominating people for these kinds of teaching awards. And so sometimes you may need to put yourself on that radar so that they can help support your application process. So I'm going to get to the actual description of the dossier. And to be fair, there are slightly different variations on how dossiers can be done. And if you look in the materials that we've distributed, there's a number of sample dossiers. They all differ a bit. Some emphasize some things more than others. Some will do things differently. And then none of them are perfect, including mine. But they hopefully will give you some sense of kind of how you can sort of put together these different sections, put together this information in a way that conveys the quality of your teaching and education. So in terms of kind of main sort of main topic areas, then these are the sort of main sections that you often see in dossiers. So, and I'll go into each of them more specifically just to have a better understanding of what they mean. So the teaching philosophy is basically a kind of a personal statement about kind of why and how you teach. All people have sort of their own sort of idea about like, how does teaching work? How does teaching work effectively? And it guides the way they do things. And so basically, this is an opportunity to sort of explain your kind of personal sense of how teaching and learning work, and how you then do things to sort of be most effective with your learners. If you look in the different sample dossiers, you can see how people approach this idea. But it is something that is important to kind of communicate how you go about teaching so that people can better understand why you might be doing things in a certain way, and show that you're actually thoughtful about your teaching, that you're approaching in a way where you're trying to be effective. Obviously, a dossier will need to document your actual teaching activities, and it's both kind of quantitative and kind of qualitative. So people want to know how much teaching you're doing and what teaching you're doing, and so there's different ways to kind of organize that. How many learners are you reaching? Reaching more learners isn't necessarily critical. You might have only a relatively few learners, but it's also important then to show that you're doing good quality teaching. So as people were mentioning before, maybe you're only supervising like 1 or 2 grad students or something like that per year, or fellows, and that's the extent of your teaching. That's totally fine. Or you might be teaching like hundreds of medical students in large lectures. That's also fine. So the key thing is to document what you are doing and then show the quality of it. Now, ratings are part of that, although I think it is important for all of us to recognize that ratings are not necessarily a purely accurate measure of effective teaching. So there's lots of things that contribute to ratings, and there are also biases that enter into ratings as well, which we at the Decadal Committee and various people in academic leadership recognize. So there's been research showing that, generally speaking, women can get lower ratings than men, for example. There's also some evidence around even how minorities can get disadvantaged in teaching ratings. So there are other things that can better communicate, or sometimes more accurately communicate, the quality of your teaching. So although ratings are asked for, it's important that you can also supplement with other evidence of the quality of your teaching. So that's where things like comments can be really valuable, for example. So you can certainly select out comments particularly comments that have some rich detail in them about why your teaching was so helpful or so effective or so valued. Look for those comments and highlight some of those kinds of comments, because sometimes those words tell a better story than just the numbers on different evaluations. The other thing that's really important about kind of documenting your teaching activities, please do not just have scans of every single evaluation form that has ever been done on you. What you want to do is organize things into tables, summaries of things, so that we can sort of at a quick glance get a sense of your teaching record and how well you're doing it. It is so painful to try to sift through 50 different evaluation forms to try to get some sense of someone's teaching ability, and I can't guarantee that every reviewer will want to put in that amount of effort. So really try to make it easy for the reviewer to summarize things and pull things together in a really kind of cogent way, so that people can understand what you're doing. So I've essentially said most of this. So you can see just done a little kind of excerpts from my dossier to sort of demonstrate some of that. Supervision and mentorship really counts as teaching, but isn't always evaluated kind of more formally. So where you can get some kind of demonstration of the impact can be, this is sometimes where like thank you cards might come in, for example, or where you can demonstrate that someone that you've been mentoring or supervising has gone on to other great success, and you can somehow tie the teaching and supervision that you provided to that success. It's great if the person themselves is able to actually verify that in some kind of communication. So, so that's really also good evidence that your teaching has been effective and helpful. We've talked about awards already, so I'm not going to go too much more into that. But one key thing, though, that is helpful when you're listing awards is to actually clarify the importance and the scope. And even what it's for. So a lot of awards just have like someone's name and it's not even clear what the award is for. And so again, for someone who's like from the Department of Microbiology, they have no idea what the award is for. So describe what the award is for, describe like the scope of the award, like is it a local award, is it in your department, is it across the faculty of medicine, is it across the province or across the country? Like what is the scope of the award, and any other features that are kind of helpful. Is it a learner nominated award or whatever? Anything like this is helpful for a reviewer to understand basically what does this award mean. Efforts to improve teaching are really important. So we want to see that as a committed teacher, you're trying to do things that'll make you a better teacher. So one simple way is that if you've received any kind of negative feedback or negative comments, how do you then respond to that? So have you done something to try to improve on that or change what you're doing based on that? All of us teachers get negative feedback at various points. I had one student who basically gave me 0 on every single item on their evaluation form, and it said something like the worst teacher ever or something like that. And the important thing is you can't hide these kinds of evaluations, you know, especially if they're in things like MedSys or Power, they're there, and you know, people won't be able to find that. So you don't try to shove that kind of stuff under the carpet. What's more useful is what are you able to do with that? How do you understand that? How do you reflect on that? And then potentially what kind of changes might you be making around that? I can tell you from the decanal committee's perspective that if we see concerning comments or concerning ratings where there hasn't clearly been a response, that might be a reason to potentially defer that application until we can be satisfied that it's been addressed more appropriately. So for example, last year, I think it was last year that we had some comments about sort of unsafe learning environment or something like that. And it wasn't clear if that was addressed or handled or, you know, properly. So we actually asked that to be deferred until we could get more information about what the nature of that issue was and was it being properly addressed. So you can obviously improve your teaching through any kind of faculty development you've participated in. So workshops on teaching, things you've read about teaching, you know, mentors you've consulted around teaching. So anything that you do to improve your teaching can be really a good demonstration that you're committed to doing an excellent job. This is fairly obvious for a lot of people, but I mean, obviously you want to show that whatever you're teaching about, you know your stuff. And so sometimes it's fairly simple to demonstrate that, but usually having some short little thing about showing that you maintain sort of yourself in an up-to-date way in the area you're teaching around, so that you're delivering appropriate content. So innovation and scholarship in teaching and education can go in a teaching dossier. Some might put it into a CPA dossier, depending on sort of the focus and area. So I think if you're mainly going forward on teaching and education, then you might choose to put this mostly in your teaching dossier. If you're mainly going forward on CPA, then innovations you've done related to teaching might go into your CPA dossier. It doesn't matter too much as long as we can find it and it's clear. I know this can confuse some people, but as long as we can find it somewhere in your application package, that's the most important thing. So, but innovations in teaching and education could be things like curricula, new teaching approaches, new evaluation methods, other kinds of materials that are related to teaching and education. You can obviously demonstrate impact through scholarship and presentations on these kinds of areas of innovation. or dissemination of it. So if you've created like a curricula and now like UBC wants to borrow it or implement it or adapt it, can you document that you've disseminated in that way and it's now having that kind of spread or impact? So if you can tell a story about it, particularly that's very compelling about how this is having impact, then that can be a really great way to do it. So I did this person attended a workshop I did on it, then they went and did this with it, and then they sent me this feedback about how it's working. Like any of that kind of narrative about the impact of teaching innovations and education scholarship can be really helpful in, again, convincing a reviewer that what you're doing is having that kind of reach and impact. So this is just an example of one thing where we worked on a peer mentoring model. We presented it at a particular conference, then someone else attended that presentation and then went on to essentially copy the model or create a similar model in another university. And then they went on to publish about their own model as well. And then I collaborated with them on further presentations on that topic. So it's just kind of showing the narrative of how an innovation can then lead to dissemination and other impacts. And then leadership and administration is also an important point if you're going forward, particularly in terms of excellence. So what's important for the reviewer is kind of what is your actual role and its importance, and what did you actually contribute? The role itself doesn't often clearly state what you did. So can you tell the story of what you did and how impactful or valuable it was? The role itself is good, and you need to help the reviewer understand what you did and why it was meaningful or effective. So I'm going to open it up to questions at this point, and I'm going to unshare my slides if it's possible. And
I've been kind of following along.
Yeah.
Could you want to comment again, John? You know, I know it comes up in Decanol, and I guess I answered it in a text, but sorry, in a chat. People aren't crazy about raw scores. Somebody's asking, they were told to put them in the appendix. Do you have a view on it? Like, you don't need to if you've got excellent summaries, right? Actually, it can irritate people, but you're not, you can put them in, right? Like, people have done it. Do you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I will. Like, I think most of us will never look at the raw scores if we have a good summary, unless we have some reason to think that someone's really fudging stuff. But most of the time, if we have a good summary, we will not need to look at the raw data. For the most part, we think that you're honest citizens who will just give us, kind of summaries with integrity. So we don't need a giant appendix with like 3,000 pages of your evaluations for the most part. So provide us good summaries with a dossier that's shorter rather than longer. The things that can go in appendices that can be maybe more useful are kind of interesting documentation that further sort of emphasizes sort of the quality of what you've done. So it might be like a specific thank you letter from a learner, for example, that relates to one of the areas that you've talked about. It might be an example of curricula that you've created that shows how well you can create that kind of quality of curricula, or maybe some kind of a demonstration of a way that you've sort of taught something that, like a lesson plan, for example, that shows how you're incorporating kind of innovative teaching approaches. Those things are often good for kind of appendices, but definitely not like just tons and tons of scanned evaluation forms. For the most part, we won't look at those if we don't need to.
Yeah. So another question was about, there's not much you can do about retrospective. Like, I know it happens with the PhDs because we're not in power. So now they kind of know to be doing this more. But you should still list retrospective, and you could even note scores weren't available at the time, whatever. But there's nothing you can do, right? I mean, you can't go back and get scores retrospectively, right? You wouldn't advise that.
You can't. So, and there are things where I will say, like, if you look at my example in my dossier, there's some things where I list what I did and there is no evaluation because I wasn't attentive enough to make sure it happened, basically. So I still list it. I mean, you can appreciate that the reviewers will still want to see some stuff that's been evaluated. So if everything you have has no evaluations, it'll be difficult for them to assess the quality of it. So, but if you want to just kind of show the total breadth of your teaching and there's some sections that don't have evaluations, that's okay, as long as there's other stuff that does have evaluations or some other measure of impact.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if any of us mentioned it. For those of you who are doing teaching in other departments, like, you know, I've done nursing, I've done psychology, whatever. You can get your, they usually do have evaluations. You may have to go and hunt them down. In the old days, you had to go to some room and get them out of a box. But anyway, they'll be somewhere, because usually the graduate departments and even undergrad, they have evaluations of their lecturers and their overall curriculums teachers, right? So don't hesitate, like try to get that stuff. And of course, try to do it soon after you teach. Like you can go back a couple of years later, but try to do it as you go. I mean, I was able to get mine from years ago, you know, when I had to go through. So that's another thing. I'm not sure, because some of you are doing interdisciplinary teaching. From my point of view, it all counts, even public. You know, if you're going to do a public lecture or you're involved in public teaching, John mentioned, you know, make sure there's some way to evaluate. I consider that, like, it all counts, right?
Right. So, you know, I taught OTs. I even taught like undergraduate students in like Scarborough campus for a few years, right? So that all counts, and those were all evaluated by those programs. So I just had to make sure I reached out and got those evaluations or summaries. They're mainly just giving you summaries. So just make sure that you're attentive to chasing after that stuff. As Mary Jane said, it's a lot easier to chase after it soon after you gave that teaching rather than many years later. Now, some places
have your own evaluation form too, though. Like John said, as his, you should have one that you use. And if you're doing teaching outside of undergrads and grad students and residents, and you are giving presentations and you're giving workshops, it should always be evaluated against the objectives. And don't discount the value of of qualitative information about your teaching excellence too. So the letter, the notes from students, keep that stuff, stick it in a file. Don't think too much about it right off the bat. Emails, have a folder in your email that is accolades or, you know, promotion dossier, where you just, once it comes in, it just file it and you can go back and organize it later.
Yeah, I have a teaching dossier folder in my Outlook. And so anything that comes in that is, I think, remotely possibly connected to my teaching dossier, I throw it in there until further notice, because I might as well keep any kind of track record of something that could potentially be useful.
If you know, it's even about having the presence of mind. If you're involved it's a bit of a CPA thing, but if you're involved in a working group and, you know, with policymakers, or you get roped into something and you spend a considerable amount of time there as an expert, and it all finishes, get a letter from the chair or from a peer if you're the chair, saying, you know, just a little bit of a statement about what your role was and what they feel the value of your contribution was. I did 15 years in leading a provincial initiative, which ended probably 2 or 3 years before I knew I was going to submit for promotion. And if I was going to wait 3 years to, you know, hit that deputy minister and kind of ask for a letter, I think they'd be saying like, who, what? So I went straight away and I said, you know, now that we've completed this 15-year project, would you mind going on record and writing me a formal letter about what you feel this initiative, what the impact it had and how well it was led and so on and so forth, which she did, and I stored it. And
yeah, I was thinking of that for Daisy's question. You know, she can't go back or something and get some evaluations. And I agree, Melanie, there wouldn't be anything wrong with Daisy, like depending on what it was, to go back to the leader of that or whatever, if they remember, and maybe they can describe what you did, or you led a team on such and such or whatever, and how that was received or anything. Because I agree with Melanie. Yeah, so it's all like pieces of evidence. Like, think about it as evidence to support national or impact or whatever the thing is you're trying to support.
Yeah, so let's say you taught a course or taught a seminar or whatever several years in a row, but you don't have evaluations now. Is there someone who's in charge of that seminar or that course who can attest to the fact that they remember that this was a well-loved seminar, that students really valued it? I mean, that's still better than nothing. At least it's not just your own personal kind of assessment of it. It's that someone else is saying that it was valued in some kind of way. So similarly, if you
It
were,
stimulated discussion. Like
Yeah.
maybe not like, oh, it was amazing, best teacher ever. It was like, wow, that was like, that made us think. And it, you know, we spent the next whole seminar the next day talking about this and thinking about the implications. That kind of input too. It isn't just about accolades and how wonderful you are. It's about what's the impact of, you know, that presentation, that work.
yeah. The other thing is, so similar to what Melanie was saying about sort of your involvement in different issues. So curriculum development is often done with many people together. And so, so if you're leading that curriculum development, that's one thing, but you might be just one person that's been part of a whole group or a team of people redeveloping curriculum. And so once you've done that piece, it's actually really great to get, again, some kind of letter, something in writing from whoever was the lead on that curriculum innovation to comment on or thank you for your contribution and what parts you worked on. That sort of is a really good kind of documentation of your contribution to that kind of curriculum effort. So even though you might say, you know, what you did and how you did this or how you created that bit or whatever, it's even better to have the person who was leading that initiative to be able to comment on your contribution.
You know, I saw the comment. I shouldn't have used the word, sorry, Daisy, poaching. It's not poaching, parachuting. But I wanted to comment about that. You know where that came from, because people were kind of basically not stealing the scholarship of others, but taking credit. So when this is new this year, and John, we haven't done this yet on Decano, but this is a whole new thing with this global stuff. And I know some of you are doing international work. If it is, you know, you can tell that story about how you mentored. I'm seeing Claire Payne, I think, was on here too. If you guys have been mentoring other countries or in research or like a CPA, like Melanie's talked about, or education, and you know, it's very tempting because in our system, we're rewarded for being first author, right? It came from that place, right? But it's actually ended up in very inequity practices. If you want to add to not just sticking on your CV, this is the role in the group project, you could say something like, from an equity point of view, or, you know, how much you've worked with this group and you've done a lot of the research, but you're sharing how to do the research methodology with them, or say Melanie's coming into a third world country and doing something in CPA, and you could actually build that into your story and say, and because of that, I'm the third author, or because we need to champion our local, you know, pioneers, and I'm mentoring. Like, if you do that, I think that would go a long way, because that is tremendous effort. And it's come out of CHR and another Canadian organization. So don't be afraid to do that, because I know some of the names on here, some of you are in fact doing that. It's painstaking, it's important work, and that's the kind of thing that will make a global impact. Like, that's international, and it's also showing leadership from kind of a global EDI ethical perspective, right? So I think that would be very welcomed and highly rewarded. Just kind of putting that out there, as opposed to sticking a little bracket on your CV saying I'm third author, but I led this. Like, that's a little different. So
yeah, we saw some applications last year where we wondered about that a bit, because it seemed that it just looked a little too much like someone was parachuting in rather than really kind of fostering and collaborating with the local scholars and allowing them to also kind of rise with the project as well, right?
Yeah. And you're also leaving an impact, right? You're showing, hopefully they're going to sustain and go forward with what, because that's happened where, by the way, that reminds me, just to put it out there, because some of you I know on here international, but you want to make sure you got credit too. There was somebody that came forward, not in psychiatry, that came forward that like looked like they were doing amazing stuff in another country, had a medal. And, you know, we wanted to promote that person. We tried so hard, and there wasn't enough impact of this. There wasn't enough description on the scholarly activity. So be careful. And it was amazing, like in terms of a medal, and it was a lot of lovely letters, but actually the reviewers at the end of the day said, well, she's doing a lot of great service, but we don't know the scholarship, we don't know the approach. Like it was, so, you know, it's, by the way, like just a volume of teaching and a volume of service will not cut it. If you cannot show excellence or effectiveness or impact, you cannot get promoted just because you've worked hard and a ton of service, whether it's national or international. You do have to help us understand the scholarship to your work.
Yeah, so it's not about like, say, going and just doing clinical work in another country, for example.
Yeah, that's right. That's what that was. Yeah.
That it has to be something beyond that. Are you capacity building? Are you helping develop their systems of care? Are you doing something that is beyond just you directly providing service? Where is the kind of scholarly activity involved?
You don't need to be the leader to be the impactful person in the group. It's not about hierarchy.
Right. And that was a bit of an issue, Melanie, because our system has sort of like supported, like you got to be the king, you know, the king of whatever. So this is kind of new. And I think that's actually an opportunity when I'm looking at some of the names here to think about that. Because it was such an issue. It's been actually reviewed in Canada, and it's considered quite unethical the way some of the stuff's been happening. So Melanie.
No, I mean, it's a big debate piece, because I mean, I would even debate the importance of high impact journals. So I'll be the map.
I know. I'm with you. I'm with you, but listen, we're dealing with nature and.
I know, but we look at all the data on how many papers actually don't get read.
Yeah.
And, you know, are 5% of the time or what have you over 5 years. And so if you want to have an impact at the moment, you still need to hit that mark, but you really should be thinking about your knowledge translation and doing it in an explicit, intentional, structured way where you're evaluating against your goals and where you go. And that is going to impress anybody. Anytime.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I was thinking when John and you were talking about, you know, don't underestimate you guys. I'm sorry, I use guys like Benoit, but anyway, don't underestimate you know, your presentations. Like, say you're doing education scholarship, so some of those journals may not be like really high level, you know, like Nature or something, but say you're talking about a curriculum and you went to British Columbia, like that's a national impact. Somebody's very interested in something you developed, you know, those national kinds of presentations or other provincials, like really beef that up, because presentations are usually peer reviewed, and if they're invited ones or a symposium you're running on some new technique or a CPA like Melanie does, listen, that starts to show this is leading. This is University of Toronto leadership coming somewhere to share now. That's dissemination, but you're having an impact. And you know, don't be shy about listing all that, because that helps offset when there's a low grant, or like the papers are maybe not like a cancer journal or something. You know, it kind of offsets, because we look at everything as a whole, the body of evidence to support national or international impact. That's how I would think about it.
Yep.
Are there other questions? I don't see anything new in the chat at this point. Anyone else have questions they'd like to ask? You can also just pop in and just directly ask.
Yeah, it's great, John, that this is your last year, John, right, doing this?
Well, I might present if people want me to present.
Okay.
But I'm certainly not going to run the program anymore.
No, because I really want to give John's been amazing to get this. You know, there were the day when we had John pulls this together every year, and we used to not have something quite as systematic, and it got better and better, and then people didn't come, and then Benoit and I and others kept saying, you got to come, and then he brought in CPA, and so I just think this is such an important thing to do. It should be mandated for everybody thinking promotion early in their career, so they know what to do. And then you can return and you can do the other pieces on top of it. But I really, John, just think it's a lot of work, and you pull together this every year. And I want to thank you because you're changing to other positions, and maybe you will be a speaker, but you're not going to have to run the whole thing like you do. So I just want to thank you, because it's been really making a difference. This has made a difference in our promotion achievements, I think, in psychiatry in the last few years.
I have two last things I want to say that are kind of lessons learned for me over being on the committee for a long time. Take the time to do a good job in pulling it together. There are some that just look like they barely did this off the side of their desk, and it comes to us in May and we look at it, and you're going to need to do the work at some point. So do it in May. And the other is, everybody in that room wants you to succeed. There is a real feeling of team spirit, collegiality, mentorship. The bar's high because it has to be. We're the University of Toronto and we have standards, and you know, nothing that's worth attaining is easy to attain. But everybody in that room that's on that promotions committee is rooting for you. And you should feel that and know that. And there are people around in the department who are around to support you on that journey leading up to that point. We're not going to do the job for you, but we're here to give you some insights and hold your hand a little bit and, you know, set you on the right path. But just know, and the biggest advocate really is Benoit. Benoit is always saying, okay, but how can we make this person succeed? You know, how can we spin this around and what feedback do we need to give them? So just know that. I think that would, if I knew that going in, I might have been a little less fearful when it was my turn, but just know that everybody's rooting for you.
And we are, I guess I'll make my little pitch. We are going to be developing, and John will be involved too. I mean, we are going to be developing a more formal mentorship program. We have a mentorship work group. We're working through it and we're starting to put the design together, I guess, starting next week. So I'm kind of hoping to launch that in the new year, in the spring, but that will be an opportunity for individuals to get a mentor if they want one, if they're at the assistant and certainly associate level even probably. So like stay tuned, because that's important, right? To understand too, like your level of scholarship and how to be doing some of the stuff you're doing, how to take some of your service evaluation and make them into a QI, for example. You know, there's a lot you can learn with having proper mentors. So that'll be coming. We'll see.
Okay. Well, I don't see any new questions, so I want to thank you all again for sticking with us this afternoon. Again, there's lots of materials that we've made available through the share file link, including various examples of people's promotion packages or sections of their packages, which we hope will be useful as sort of things to at least kind of model from or reference points for you creating your own materials. And then also there's lots of individuals in this department, including us, who would be happy to also connect with you and answer some of your questions about getting things prepared. Including also your chiefs, your division directors, and so on. So there's lots of people that want to help people pursue this effectively and want to help simplify it and demystify it. So please feel free to approach anyone that seems to be relevant to what you want to sort of tackle.
And use the documentation that's there and listed on the website. Don't come to, like, read that first.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And look at the, you know, there are exemplar dossiers still listed, I think, for, you know, they look a little different, and that's good. That's fine.
Yeah, they're all different. The CPAs always look different.
It's not cookie cutter, you know.
Okay. All right, well, take care. Thank you, everyone. You will get an evaluation. Please give us feedback on this. It's always important for how we go forward with this kind of a program. So please fill out your evaluations and let us know what we can do differently in the future. Okay?
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, all of you. Hugely appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Mary Jane, Melanie.
Thank you
guys. Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Ready?
Thanks, Paula. Too.
And thanks, Paula.
No
Yeah.
problem. Behind the scenes.
Oh, important part. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. And have a great weekend.
You too.
Okay. All right. Take care. See you, everyone.